Hey guys, tonight we're travelling way back over 1,000 years to a world that's cold, smoky, and probably smells like wet fur and old onions. Welcome to Viking Age Scandinavia. You're about to crawl into a longhouse somewhere near the fjords, probably in late January, and I've got bad news. You probably won't survive this. But hey, that's part of the fun, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not about that fake loyalty. Also, let me know in the comments, what city are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? I love seeing where and when you all tune in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's well past sunset, and that doesn't mean much because this time of year the sun dipped below the horizon around 3 PM anyway. You trudge through knee-deep snow, a heavy wool cloak wrapped around you, thick boots laced with rawhide, breath fogging into the icy air. Ahead, the longhouse glows faintly like a lantern laid on its side, light flickering out through thin wood slats and around a crudely made door. You duck inside. Instantly your nose is assaulted by warmth, smoke, and a pungent blend of livestock and human proximity. There's the unmistakable scent of wet dog, sweat, fermented fish, and a tiny note of birch smoke lingering in the haze above. It's dark, too. What little light there is comes from the fire pit sunk into the centre of the dirt floor, glowing like a dragon's eye in the gloom. Shadows dance on the timbers above, and somewhere off to your left someone coughs in their sleep. Welcome to your new reality. The longhouse isn't just a place to crash, it's the nucleus of Viking life. Families live, eat, sleep, argue, weave, die, and are born all within these walls. It's not massive, but it's big enough to feel like a cave if you've spent the day out in the wind. It stretches about 60 feet long and maybe 20 feet wide, built low to the ground with thick wooden planks, overlapping turf, and in wealthier homes, layered stone foundations. If you're imagining drafty gaps and icy winds whistling through, think again. The Vikings knew what they were doing. Thick sod layered over the roof adds insulation, and the wooden walls are tight, often caulked with moss, wool, or animal hair packed into every seam. It's not luxury, but it's not death either, not immediately anyway. You shuffle toward the fire, stepping over low sleeping benches that double as daybeds and storage. The fire pit runs lengthwise along the centre, and people are arranged in a kind of informal ring around it, facing the warmth, back to the cold. The fire isn't roaring, wood is too precious for that. It crackles gently, sending up long streamers of smoke that pool under the rafters before filtering out through a small hole in the ceiling, or just through the thatch. You cough a little. Breathing indoors in the Viking world is basically a low-grade lung workout, and yes, no chimney. That's not a design flaw, it's actually kind of brilliant. The smoke adds a layer of heat insulation, drives out bugs, and even helps preserve the roof timbers from rotten insects. That said, everyone in here is going to develop the lungs of a coal miner by age 35. A small child scoots past you, barefoot, carrying a chunk of dried meat. You catch a glimpse of where you'll be sleeping tonight, on a bench against the wall, topped with straw and covered in furs. It's not bad, honestly. The body heat of a dozen people, the low ceiling, and the fire in the centre mean that while it's not warm, it's survivable. You won't be walking around in shorts, but you probably won't turn into a Viking popsicle either. Your cloak is damp from snow, so you hang it on a wooden peg by the door, alongside several other woolen cloaks, some patched, some crusted with dried mud and who knows what. There's a quiet murmur of conversation still happening at the far end of the house. Two older men trading what sounds like gossip, or possibly just grumbling about goats. The mood is low energy, soothed by the fire's lull and the weight of evening. And let's talk about that weight. It's physical. The darkness here isn't like city darkness, it's absolute. Outside, the sky is black and starless, clouds piled up like bruises. Inside, even the firelight seems to surrender at the edges. It presses on your shoulders, nudges your eyelids. The body responds to it. Melatonin surges, joints ache, your breath naturally slows. You don't fight the night here, you accept it. And that's something historians still debate. How deeply seasonal light patterns affected Norse sleep cycles. There's evidence suggesting people didn't sleep in a single 8-hour block like we do today. Instead, they may have followed segmented sleep patterns. 4 to 5 hours of rest, a period of quiet wakefulness, then another stretch of sleep before dawn. During that twilight wakefulness, people might pray, meditate, tell stories, or even, well, stay warm together. But that's a debate still up for grabs. Some scholars argue the segmented sleep model fits better in more temperate zones, while up here in the high latitudes, people may have simply passed out from exhaustion and stayed that way until nature, or livestock, woke them. Speaking of livestock, you're not alone here, and I'm not just talking about humans. Off toward the far wall, you spot a few shadowy forms. 2 goats, a sheep, and what looks like a cow curled in a pen of straw. Animals were often brought inside for warmth, not because the Vikings were soft-hearted, but because the animals produced heat, and every warm body counted. It's like sleeping in a furnace with hooves and terrible personal hygiene. You settle onto your bench. It's firm, but the furs soften the edges. A heavy woolen blanket is handed to you without a word by an older woman with grey braids and calloused hands. She grunts, approvingly or not, it's hard to tell, and settles onto her own bench nearby, pulling the blanket up to her chin. As your eyes adjust and your body gives in to the fire's rhythm, you realise something unexpected. It's peaceful. Not quiet exactly. There's the crackle of the fire, the shift of animals, the occasional cough or snore, but there's a rhythm, like the Longhouse is breathing, and maybe, just maybe, you'll make it through the night after all. By the time your body finally relaxes into the fur-draped bench, the room has grown quieter. The earlier rustle of people settling in has faded, replaced by the dull cadence of deep breathing, occasional murmured words, and the fire sighing low. It's the kind of warmth that doesn't hit you like a modern heater. It creeps in slowly, a dry heat that smells of charred wood and old fat, wrapping around your legs first and lazily stretching upward. You aren't exactly cosy, but you're not shivering either, and when you think about where you are, buried in the heart of a Scandinavian winter, that's a minor miracle. The Longhouse, by Viking standards, is a masterpiece of simple yet effective design. You're lying in a structure built almost entirely by hand, using nothing more than basic tools, brute strength, and a hefty dose of trial and error passed down through generations. There's nothing flashy here. No paint, no iron nails, no decorative flourishes unless you're lucky enough to be crashing in a jarl's house. Just timber, massive beams forming the skeleton of the building, stacked horizontally with overlapping planks forming the walls. They're fastened with wooden pegs, rawhide, or the sheer stubbornness of Norse craftsmanship. Over time, the wood has darkened with smoke, giving the whole interior a kind of smoked meat hue. If you ran your hand along the nearest beam, it would feel both rough and slightly greasy. 1,000 nights of smoke have left a coating you could almost mistake for varnish. The walls, surprisingly, don't leak cold the way you'd expect. Vikings layered moss, straw, or seaweed into the cracks, wedging it tight like mortar. In some places you'll even find clumps of wool or linen scraps stuffed into narrow slits, acting as makeshift insulation. Primitive? Sure, but somehow it works. Then there's the floor. It's just packed earth, hardened by generations of feet, spilled broth, and whatever else has seeped into it over the years. In winter, it's cold, so cold it could sting your toes if you dared to walk barefoot. But the central fire does enough to take the edge off, and truth be told, you won't be walking around much. You'll sleep, sit, maybe shuffle over to the fire once or twice, and hope someone else is getting up first to stoke it if it dies down. One quirky detail that you'd never expect in this prehistoric Airbnb: the Longhouse is slightly curved, not dramatically, but just enough that, from the outside, it resembles the hull of an overturned ship. That's no coincidence. Viking houses mimic their boats. The shape helps with stability in high winds and keeps snow from building up too heavily on the roof. Some scholars think there's a spiritual reason too, that the Longhouse was meant to be a vessel, a ship that carried families through the long winters, just as the sea carried raiders to distant shores. It's poetic, really. Cold, smoky, cramped, but poetic. And then, the roof. If you had the energy to stand and squint upward, you'd see layers of thick timber beams crisscrossing each other like ribs. Above that, sod, actual earth, piled up and planted with grass. The sod roof is one of the unsung heroes of Viking survival. It's heavy, yes, so the whole house needs thick vertical support beams, but it's also incredible at keeping heat in and cold out, like an enormous earthy blanket thrown over the house. Snow piles on top in winter, and rather than being a problem, it helps even more, acting as an insulator. The colder it gets outside, the warmer it can actually become inside, assuming you've got the fire going and the cow doesn't knock over a wall in its sleep. Now, we have to pause for a bit of academic arm wrestling. Not everyone agrees on exactly how these houses were built. Most of what we know comes from archaeological digs in places like Iceland, Norway and Greenland, where the remains of longhouses have been uncovered beneath centuries of soil and volcanic ash. Some scholars argue that most Viking homes weren't quite as robust as we imagine. They were temporary, slapped together for one winter or two before being rebuilt. Others claim they were long-term structures, passed down through generations, modified as families grew or fortunes changed. The truth, as usual, is probably both. Wealthier families could afford to invest in longhouses that would last, while poorer farmers made do with what they could scavenge. Whatever the case, right now you're lying in one that's held up just fine. There are no visible leaks. The wind, though fierce outside, doesn't scream through the boards, and that eerie Scandinavian quiet, so loud in the open fjordlands, vanishes entirely once you're indoors. The longhouse swallows sound. It holds warmth. It makes the night bearable. A woman near the far end of the room stirs, pulling a woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. A baby coos in its sleep beside her, wrapped tightly in layers of fur and linen, tucked into a small wooden cradle that hangs, yes, hangs, from the rafters like a hammock. That's no accident either. Suspending cradles keeps them away from the cold ground and gently rocks the child when someone moves nearby. The movement of the house becomes the lullaby. Not too bad for the 9th century. Somewhere near your feet, a small mouse scurries along the edge of the bench. You flinch a little but don't make a sound. No one reacts. Everyone here knows the mice live here too. They're part of the household, just like the goats and the smoke and the mossy walls. You're not in control here. You're just another organism trying to stay warm. Your bench creaks as you shift. You've tucked your hands beneath the fur for warmth. Even through your wool underlayers, you feel the slight prickle of cold air licking at your skin in places where the fire doesn't reach. It's not unpleasant, more like the way cool sheets feel when you first slide into bed. But you also know if that fire died completely, and the cold got its claws into this room, you'd feel it fast. That's why someone, maybe you, if you don't fake sleep hard enough, will have to get up in the middle of the night and add another log to the fire. You close your eyes for a moment. The scent of wood smoke and the low moan of the wind outside becomes part of your breathing. Your heartbeat slows. A nearby rooster coughs in its sleep. Yes, roosters cough. You didn't expect that. But nothing surprises you now. You're beginning to understand that survival in the Viking Age wasn't just about weapons, raids, or glorious battles. It was about building smart, adapting to nature, and knowing how to wring warmth out of whatever you had. Be it sod, cows, or tightly packed sleeping bodies. You breathe in deeply. It's smoky, but it's also oddly reassuring. You're not warm, not exactly, but you're not freezing either, and that, in Viking terms, is as good as it gets. The fire pops softly in the dark, a glowing spine running down the longhouse's centre. You're still half awake, limbs heavy with that syrupy warmth that only comes after hours of enduring the cold. Around you, the breathing of sleepers rises and falls in a weirdly synchronized lullaby. It's almost hypnotic. The heat isn't coming from the fire alone anymore. It's being held, passed between bodies and walls, and the sheer will of a structure designed for this exact moment. Still, the real unsung hero of this nightly survival operation lies right beneath your nose, or, more accurately, beneath your feet. The fire pit itself. This hearth, long and narrow like the spine of a boat, is the literal and symbolic heart of the Viking home. It's where meals are made, stories are told, gossip is whispered, iron is worked, and, most crucially, where the cold gets kept at bay. Without this trench of glowing coals and dry wood, none of this would be happening. The longhouse would be a tomb. There's no chimney above it, just a small vent or opening in the roof, sometimes nothing more than a gap where the smoke can seep through. You'd think that would mean the smoke chokes you out, but the design is surprisingly effective. The fire sits low, and the ceiling high in the centre, so the smoke rises and hovers in the upper layers of the house like a lazy ghost, layering the beams with soot but leaving the lower level, where you eat, sit and sleep, mostly breathable. Mostly. But this fire pit doesn't just warm people. It serves another strange and very Viking function. It hardens the house itself. The constant smoke preserves the wood, discourages rot, repels pests, and dries out the thatch above, preventing leaks. Even your bedding, though smoky, stays relatively free of mites or mould, which is impressive when you consider you're basically lying in a pile of untreated animal skins. The fire isn't left to chance either. Someone, usually the youngest, or the one who lost the daily bet with fate, gets up a few times each night to check the embers, shift the logs, maybe sneak a quick sip of leftover stew if no one's looking. It's a system, informal but sacred. If the fire goes out and the coals die completely, restarting it is no small task. It takes skill with flint, dry tinder, and the patience of someone who doesn't want frostbite. So it's simpler to just keep it alive. The hearth isn't just heat, it's continuity, it's community. You don't let it die unless you're planning to die too. There's a quiet fascination among modern historians with just how efficient these fires were. People often assume medieval homes were freezing inside, but that's a modern bias, projecting our central heating expectations onto ancient survival strategies. In truth, a well-built fire pit like this, in a properly sealed longhouse, could maintain livable temperatures all night long. Not tropical, mind you. You won't be stripping down to linen, but enough to keep limbs intact. Anthropologists have even found evidence that some Norse homes had stone linings along their fire pits, which helped retain and radiate heat for longer stretches. Think of it like a Viking version of underfloor heating. If the floor was made of packed earth and ash, and your socks were made from goat hair. It's tempting to romanticize this setup, but let's be clear, it's not a spa day. Smoke still stings your eyes, and the air is always dry. Your throat itches from the soot, and if someone mismanages the fire and it flares too high, you're one sneeze away from burning the entire longhouse down. That's not an exaggeration. There are recorded instances of homes catching fire from careless embers or an overturned pot, which, let's face it, is a pretty awkward way to die after surviving raiders, starvation and snowstorms. Still, there's something deeply calming about watching it burn. You're staring at it now, half-lidded, watching the glowing orange logs collapse inward, like ribs folding into themselves. Occasionally someone shifts on a bench nearby, maybe throwing on another fur, maybe mumbling in sleep. The fire glows on their faces for a moment before fading again. One of the most unusual facts about Viking hearths isn't just their warmth, it's their role as social magnets. In the darkness of winter, when daylight lasts only a few hours, families spend most of their time around the fire. Meals are cooked there, yes, but also iron tools are repaired, thread is spun, wooden bowls are carved. Evenings are long, and the fire is where you gather to hear the old sagas, told by the elder with the deepest voice and the best memory. And here's the quirky bit. The fire was often believed to be inhabited. Not just metaphorically, it was thought to be alive. Some sagas reference hearth spirits or domestic gods that dwell in the coals, watching over the home. The fire had to be treated with respect. No spitting in it, no urinating nearby. Yes, people had to be reminded, and certainly no letting it die overnight. That's not just laziness, that's sacrilege. Some scholars debate whether this animistic belief in fire spirits was widespread or isolated to certain regions. Was it a pan-Norse idea, or something more localized, perhaps blending with the beliefs of the Sami or older Germanic tribes? It's hard to say. Oral traditions don't always line up with archaeological evidence, and a spirit that lives in the hearth doesn't exactly leave behind a fossil. Still, the reverence was real. The fire was a being, not just a utility. And you, dear visitor, are now sleeping a few feet from it. And speaking of sleeping, you're not the only one using the fire to cheat the cold. Along the opposite bench, two children are curled together under a fur that used to be a bear, judging by its patchy ear and oversized paw still attached at the hem. They've drifted into that twitchy, half-smiling stage of sleep where dreams begin. The firelight makes them look like carved figurines. Flushed cheeks, small round noses, matted blonde hair tangled against the bench. You blink slowly, heavy-eyed, and realize you're being lulled again. The fire's soft glow pulses behind your lids. The bench beneath you creaks gently as the person beside you shifts in their sleep, muttering something that might be a name or just a nonsense dream word. The goat snorts, and the fire continues to hum, constant, quiet, faithful. If you'd asked someone back then what kept Vikings alive through the winter, they might say their gods, or their strength, or their family. But lying here now, you understand the quieter truth. It's this fire, right here, a row of coals and patience burning just hot enough to hold back the ice, for tonight at least. The fire dies down to a gentle glow, a fading heartbeat in the centre of the room, and your eyes drift up toward the roof. You can't quite see it in the dark, just the faintest shimmer of moonlight glancing through the smoke vent, catching on the haze like it's trying to peek in on your little huddle of warmth and exhaustion. And now, as the rest of the house breathes in slow harmony, you start to think about what's overhead. The roof, the very thing keeping the snow, wind and winter gods from crashing down on your head. It's not just a roof, it's a carefully calculated barrier between life and frostbite. And believe it or not, the Viking roof is the star of the survival show. It's big, sloping and heavy, not just architecturally, but literally layered with the weight of Earth itself. Sod roofs were common, especially in regions where trees were scarce or weather was particularly brutal. And while they may look like something out of a fairy tale, or like a house that accidentally sprouted a lawn, these thick grassy layers served an essential purpose. You can almost feel the mass of it pressing down from above, layers of birch bark, woven thatch, and finally thick chunks of turf, cut like bricks and stacked over each other like shingles. That's not just to keep out the snow, that's thermal insulation in its purest, greenest form. Sod has this magical ability to hold in warmth during winter and keep things cool during summer. It's also self-repairing. If it rains, the moss and grass keep growing, naturally resealing any cracks, and it muffles sound too, so storms rage quietly above while inside people sleep on in oblivious peace, or at least a smoky version of peace. If you're still picturing something fragile or makeshift, you need to readjust. These roofs were often supported by internal load-bearing posts, massive wooden columns that reached up like tree trunks through the centre of the room, anchoring the ridge beam and holding up the weight of soil and snow. You saw one when you came in, maybe brushed your hand along its rough surface. It probably felt like stone, solid, ancient, still slightly warm from the fire's heat rising. These support posts weren't just structural. In some households they were carved with faces, runes or abstract spirals, part decoration, part protection, part superstition. The Norse didn't draw a hard line between the practical and the mystical. To them, everything was a little bit of both. Now here's where things get interesting, quirky even. Sod roofs are technically alive, and not just in a symbolic circle of life sort of way. We're talking full-on ecosystems. Birds nest in them, wildflowers sprout, insects burrow. If you were to poke your head up through the smoke vent in spring, assuming you survived the winter and hadn't passed out from smoke inhalation, you might find a small patch of clover waving hello. In fact, in some places, families intentionally planted herbs on their roofs. Why? Easy access, and possibly a bit of Norse aesthetic. Who wouldn't want their roof to smell like thyme and mint while also repelling flies? But all this earthy insulation doesn't work in isolation. It's part of a system. The walls, the roof, the fire, the people, all working together like a breathing living shelter. The thick sod on top only works if the heat from inside rises and has something to press against. That central fire, it's like a warm exhale that fills the space beneath the roof, heating the air and drying out the layers above. So yes, your lungs are full of smoke half the time, but that's the price you pay for not freezing to death in your sleep. There's still scholarly debate around just how effective these roofs were in real-world conditions. Some archaeological reconstructions suggest that heat loss was higher than we'd assume, especially if the sod became waterlogged or if the fire was weak. Others argue that with proper maintenance, replacing thatch, repairing turf, sealing gaps, the roof could retain heat so well that the inside stayed a comfortable 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit even when it dropped below freezing outside. That might not sound impressive if you're sitting in a hoodie with a thermostat nearby, but trust me, out here it's practically a sauna. What isn't debated is that building one of these roofs was a colossal pain. It required tools, teamwork and patience. You had to source thick turf from the right kind of soil, not too sandy or too loose. You had to strip it up in neat squares, dry it, then haul it to the roof using ropes, ladders, and probably a lot of shouting. It's heavy too. A sod roof could weigh several tons. Not ideal if your support beams were half rotten or you skimped on the architecture, yet people did it, again and again. Why? Because when winter settles its claws into your world and the fjord freezes over and your goat won't stop shivering, A good roof is the line between surviving until spring or becoming a frost-covered cautionary tale. You listen now to the sound of the wind buffeting the outside of the house. It comes in long waves, howling, retreating, then returning with a snarl. You hear nothing shifting overhead. No rattling, no creaking, no drafts sneaking in. That roof isn't just working, it's performing. You imagine snow stacking silently on top of it, forming a thicker, colder layer that paradoxically helps seal in the heat below, like putting an extra blanket on top of an oven. The air in the room is warmer than it has any right to be, but not stifling. You pull your fur tighter, nose barely peeking out, and take a moment to appreciate the fact that the Vikings didn't try to conquer winter. They learned to live with it. They made homes that blended into the earth, borrowed insulation from nature, and survived not because they were tougher, although, let's face it, they were, but because they were smart. You glance again toward the rafters, where that faint shimmer of moonlight still struggles to reach through the vent. Somewhere up there, just inches above your head, is a layer of turf, probably frozen solid, holding back the cold, the wind, and a full sky's worth of snow. You can almost hear it sigh under the weight, like a big, sleeping beast stretched out across the house, and beneath it you sigh too. The fire crackles gently again, stirred by someone moving nearby. The darkness presses in, but the longhouse holds. The roof above is thick with earth, grass, and maybe even a stubborn weed or two. But it's doing its job. It's keeping you alive. And for tonight, that's enough. You're lying there, half buried in warmth, tracing the slow journey of heat across your body. Fire to air, air to skin, skin to bone. And while the roof above earns its share of praise, the walls of the longhouse deserve a slow, reverent nod too. They're the unsung champions of this nightly battle against winter, standing shoulder to shoulder with the elements, refusing to let the cold sneak in. They don't look like much at first glance. Rough wooden planks patched in places darkened by time and smoke, but they're layered with the ingenuity of people who had nothing but trees, mud, and willpower to work with. The walls closest to you are timber-framed, notched and fitted so tightly that even a determined gust of wind would have a hard time poking through. In the wealthier longhouses, the planks are sawn clean and smooth, overlapping horizontally like a weathered jigsaw puzzle, stacked in deliberate rows with moss or wool stuffed into the seams. Poorer homes might use what's called wattle and daub, a woven lattice of sticks slathered in a sticky mix of clay, straw, and animal dung. It sounds grim, and okay, it smells grim when it's wet, but it works. Once dried, it hardens into a surprisingly sturdy thermal shell, like an ancient form of drywall that happens to repel the wind and trap heat better than you'd think. You reach out and touch the nearest board. It's cool but not freezing. Solid. The kind of solid that comes from 100 winters, endless repairs, and maybe the occasional patch of bear grease rubbed into the grain to keep it from cracking. There's no glass in the window, because fun fact, there is no window. Not in the way you're used to. Maybe a tiny slit cut into the wall, covered with a stretched animal bladder to let in faint light during the day. But at night, total blackout. The kind that makes you wonder if your eyes still work, and that's kind of the point. Less light means less heat loss. Every tiny gap in a wall is a doorway for frost, so windows are seen as vulnerabilities, not luxuries. If you wanted to spy on the snowstorm outside, you'd have to open the door, and honestly, why would you? The entire point of the longhouse is to keep the outside firmly out. It's not just shelter, it's a womb of warmth, and no one invites winter in for a peek. You shuffle in your blankets, thinking about how much air leaks out of a modern house. Even with insulation, drywall, double-glazed windows, somehow it always feels like the heat disappears. Here, where every inch was hand-fitted and patched with moss, the longhouse holds its breath with you. The walls don't just stop wind, they store warmth, radiating it back slowly like a thermal memory. The wood, the packed mud, the inner animal pelts hung here and there, all of it conspires to make you forget that the world outside is trying to kill you with icicles and despair. And here's where it gets wonderfully weird. Some longhouses had walls that moved. Not in a haunted house kind of way. Sorry, no Viking poltergeists, but literally adjustable panels. Archaeologists have found examples where the inner wall panels could be shifted or removed to create airflow in warmer months, or even to make space for animals during the coldest nights. That's not architecture. That's a lifestyle. Imagine building your home out of IKEA panels, but instead of Allen wrenches and regrets, You're using antler tools and decades of passed down know-how. Historians debate how widespread these modular designs were. Some think only the Icelandic longhouses had them, adapted to the unique weather of volcanic terrain and icy gales. Others argue that these features were common across Scandinavia but didn't survive well in the archaeological record. Either way, it shows something important. These walls weren't static. They adapted, just like the people inside them. And speaking of people, you're not alone, not even close. To your left, someone coughs in their sleep, then shifts under a pile of sealskin and mutters something unintelligible. Further down the line, you hear the soft creak of someone rising to add more wood to the fire. Their feet shuffle across the floor with the quiet experience of someone who's done this 1,000 times. You don't see them. You only feel the brief blast of heat as they stoke the embers, and the way the walls respond. The temperature lifts subtly. The walls accept the new warmth, as if sighing in relief, and slowly begin their invisible task of holding it in for as long as possible. There's also the sound, faint, repetitive, of an animal scratching near one of the walls. Maybe a goat, maybe something smaller. The walls don't keep out noise, not completely, and every creak or gust or scurry echoes in the timbers. But again, it's part of the rhythm. This house lives. The walls groan in the wind like a ship's hull at sea, stretching and settling. You feel it more than hear it, a low murmur that runs through the floor and into your spine. A soft memory surfaces, something the elder at the far end of the house said earlier, before most people fell asleep. He spoke about the walls as protectors, about how the planks were once trees that stood in forests where spirits lived, and now, even shaped by axe and nail, those spirits linger. Some believe the house listens, that it remembers, that if you treat the walls with respect, they'll stand a little firmer in a storm. Laughable, maybe. But lying here in the flickering dark, it doesn't feel so far-fetched. You tuck your fingers deeper into the fur blanket. The cold no longer feels invasive. It feels distant, like a memory you're gradually forgetting. The walls hold it back. You imagine them braced against the wind, like warriors with wooden shields refusing to yield. Not for a night. Not for 100 nights. Another odd fact floats through your brain. Some longhouses were built partially underground, dug into the earth for better insulation. The lower you go, the warmer it gets, and Viking architects, yes, let's call them that, understood this well. If you're lucky enough to be in one of those sunken homes, the walls around you are packed earth halfway up, with timber above. It's not glamorous, but it's effective, like living in a hobbit hole with better weaponry. And so you settle in, once again aware of the layers between you and the cold void outside. Fire, fur, wood, earth. All of it arranged with care, tradition, and a little bit of smoke-blackened magic. You're still in a place where the wind howls and the stars freeze, but in here, the walls are holding. That's all they have to do. At some point in the night, you wake up just enough to realize you're sweating. Not a lot. Just that low-level, damp warmth that collects behind your knees and under your collar when you've been too deeply wrapped for too long. You squirm slightly, loosening the fur near your face, and catch a whiff of something very barnyard. And that's when you remember. You're not sleeping alone. You're in a longhouse with livestock. Because of course you are. It's one of those things that sounds terrible until you're actually here, half-thawed and drowsy, and then it suddenly makes sense. This isn't just a house. It's an ark, floating through a sea of snow and wind and bitter nights. Every warm body counts, and if that warm body happens to moo or chew cud in its sleep, well, so be it. Over near the far end of the house, there's a low pen made of rough-hewn wood slats. Inside it, you can make out the shape of 2 cows and a sheep huddled close together. There's straw on the floor, musty, trampled, already half frozen from the chill that sneaks up through the dirt. But the animals don't seem to mind. They lie close, emitting occasional groans or snorts, clouds of steam puffing from their nostrils. Their presence shifts the whole atmosphere of the room. You can feel the warmth radiating off them, like small living furnaces with hooves. The cows, especially, are MVPs in this arrangement. Each one gives off a decent amount of body heat, and when you put a few of them in an enclosed space with poor ventilation, things heat up fast. It's not glamorous, definitely not a spa experience, but it's surprisingly effective. These aren't just farm animals, they're insulation. Walking, mooing, occasionally farting insulation. And if you're wondering about the smell, yes, it's there. But after a while, your brain just filters it out. The combination of smoke, damp wool, cooked meat, and cow breath sort of blends into a single atmospheric scent, like the Viking version of a scented candle called Survival. You're lying in it, breathing it in, and you're not dying of hypothermia, so hey, who's complaining? Vikings didn't have separate barns, at least not in winter. Splitting the house into zones, one end for people, one for animals, was the norm, especially in harsher climates like Iceland and Greenland. The architectural layout was strategic. Animals in the back, near the door, so their heat would warm the room, and their, let's call it output, wouldn't overwhelm the living space. A shallow trench sometimes ran down the middle of the longhouse to help drain liquids, yes, those liquids, away from the main living area. Primitive plumbing, Viking edition. But there's more to it than just warmth. Keeping the livestock inside protected them too, from predators, from thieves, and from freezing to death just as easily as you might without that fur cloak. In a culture where a single cow could mean the difference between survival and starvation, letting your animals freeze outside wasn't just cruel, it was stupid. Still, the setup wasn't without risks. In close quarters, disease spreads fast. Lice and fleas thrive, hooves damage the floor, and sometimes an angry bull decides to practice his battle charge while everyone else is trying to sleep. But these were known issues, and Vikings had ways of managing them. Regular cleaning, rotating animals out if possible, and just sheer stubborn adaptation. There's also a certain fringe theory among researchers that Vikings believed sleeping near animals provided spiritual benefits, not just heat or convenience, but a kind of protective energy. Some Norse myths link animals with the gods, Thor's goats, Odin's wolves and ravens, so having beasts nearby may have felt symbolically safe, like sharing your bed with minor deities, snoring, gassy deities, but still. And let's not forget, livestock made noise, real noise. One of the odd comforts of this world is the ever-present backdrop of clucks, bleats and sighs. A chicken ruffles its feathers near your feet. Somewhere off to your right, a goat coughs like a judgmental uncle. It's weirdly reassuring. In a world with no clocks, no phones, no glowing digital nonsense, animals provide the soundtrack. They're the background hum of life, letting you know the world hasn't frozen solid just yet. You shift again under your blanket, adjusting the fur against your cheek. It's softer now, warm from hours of body heat. You can feel how the room has grown hotter, denser with the mingled breath of people and beasts. It's not suffocating, but it is thick. You imagine the walls soaking it all up like a sponge, smoke, heat, breath, sound. This place is alive in ways your modern brain never considered. And here's a fun historical detail. In some longhouses, especially during the harshest months, Vikings would cover their animals with blankets too. Not fancy embroidered ones, obviously, but coarse woven wool or hide sheets. Why? Because a warmer animal gives off more heat. It's not unlike throwing a blanket over a hot water bottle. You create a feedback loop of warmth. Animal heats blanket, blanket traps heat, animal gets warmer, you survive another night. Of course, there's debate. Some archaeologists argue that only the wealthiest homes brought livestock indoors, that poorer families had to choose between warmth and sanitation. Others suggest the reverse, that the poorest had no separate barns and no choice but to bunk with the beasts. The evidence is patchy, and interpretations vary. But one thing is clear. Animals were part of the household in more ways than one. They weren't just tools, they were survival partners. Back in the present, you let your eyes close again. The bleat of a sheep rises and fades, like a lullaby sung by someone who really doesn't care if you fall asleep or not. The fire pops once. The warmth holds. You smell hay and damp wool and something sharp you can't name. Maybe the scent of earth buried under snow. Maybe just the smell of life clinging on in a house made of wood, earth, fur and patience. You're aware of the cow's breath as it exhales softly, steam rising in the firelight. You imagine that breath like a spell, thick, warm, ancient. It mingles with yours. And somewhere in that quiet, the longhouse exhales too. For all its discomforts, this life was a system. Brutal, brilliant, earthy. Everyone, people and animals alike, gave off just enough heat to keep the cold at bay. And right now, in this flickering, fart-scented sanctuary, you're a small part of that balance. One warm body among many, woven into the survival of the whole. Morning doesn't arrive with sunlight. It just slowly becomes a slightly less oppressive version of night. The longhouse remains wrapped in its dim, smoky hush, but there's a subtle shift in the air. less like sleep and more like hibernation starting to lift. Someone coughs, someone else groans as they stretch under a tangle of wool, and the fire, which barely held on through the last few hours, is now reduced to a few sullen embers clinging to their last bit of life. You blink awake under your mound of fur, body sore, hair probably matted to one side of your head, and you realise something rather profound. You didn't freeze to death. Credit, of course, goes to the fire, the cows, and the moss-plugged walls, but also, importantly, to where you slept. Sleeping in a Viking longhouse wasn't some random sprawl of limbs on the floor. There was a system, a design, and your new favourite piece of Norse furniture, the bed box or sleeping bench, or whatever chunk of structure you happen to claim as your nest for the night. You shift upright, rubbing the stiffness from your shoulders, and glance around. The room is still mostly horizontal. People curled in furs, kids tangled together like sleepy puppies, a few adults already up and stirring stew over the rekindled fire. But what stands out most is the line of raised wooden platforms along either side of the longhouse, running the length of the walls. These are the sleeping benches, and if you're lucky you're on one now. They're about waist high, wide enough to lie on, and filled with straw or dried grass for padding. It's a humble mattress, topped with animal hides, sheepskin, and the occasional heirloom blanket passed down from a grandmother who probably slept through 4 plagues and a raid or 2. The bench isn't fancy, but it's brilliant in its simplicity. Raised up off the dirt floor, it avoids the cold that seeps upward during the night. It's also a storage space. Underneath, you'll find firewood, tools, maybe a pickled fish barrel or 2. In some wealthier homes, the sleeping bench becomes more of a cubicle, boxed in with wooden partitions or thick curtains to trap body heat and provide a bit of privacy. Not enough to hide your snoring, but enough to keep you from waking up with someone else's foot in your face. And that partitioning, that's where things get surprisingly clever. See, sleep wasn't just about crashing wherever. There was an unspoken geography to the longhouse, almost like social seating at a medieval dinner party, except horizontal and with less wine. Families typically slept close together, often in family units. Parents and young children on the same bench, extended relatives nearby. Older folks or high-status individuals claimed the best spots, usually close to the central fire, where the heat was strongest and the smoke least overwhelming. The sick and injured were placed nearby too, so they could be watched, warmed, and, let's be honest, whispered about. Meanwhile, guests and lower-status individuals were relegated to the outer edges, farthest from the hearth, closest to the cold. So if you found yourself sleeping near the door, congratulations, you were the expendable one, or more generously, the one with the fastest reflexes in case a wolf or a neighbour with a grudge tried to bust in. This sleep layout reflects the social structure. Vikings didn't waste space, and they didn't waste warmth. Every sleeping spot was a status symbol. And unlike our world, where privacy is a birthright and personal space is sacred, communal sleeping was the default. You weren't supposed to drift off in solitude. You were expected to snooze shoulder to shoulder with your kin, hearing every sigh, cough, fart, and mumble. Honestly, it's probably the closest thing to modern camping, if your tent was filled with livestock, smoke, and a handful of children throwing elbows in their sleep. As you swing your legs down from the bench and feel the chill of the packed earth beneath your feet, you get a new appreciation for the fur pile you just emerged from. The layering system was key. Vikings slept with multiple layers of bedding, fur on the bottom, wool or linen over the body, and heavier skins on top. In the coldest months, people would sleep fully clothed, with their cloaks or coats pulled over them like blankets. No one cared how wrinkled you looked in the morning. The goal was simple: don't die. Interestingly, archaeological digs have found bedding materials in Viking graves, fur blankets, woven mats, even remnants of straw pillows, which tells us that sleeping arrangements weren't just functional, they were part of identity. You were buried with what brought you comfort, that same itchy wool blanket you cursed every night. Into the grave it went. One strange debate that persists among scholars is whether Vikings used sleeping hats, those soft woolen caps that often show up in medieval art. There's limited physical evidence, but logic says yes. Heat escapes through the head, and if you're sleeping in an unheated longhouse with ice forming on the roof, it makes sense to tuck that noggin in. So, imagine yourself now, wrapped in hides, a floppy woolen cap pulled down over your ears, breathing through your nose to avoid mouthfuls of smoke, and clinging to a half-warm patch of straw like your life depends on it. Because it kind of does. As the fire catches again and the room begins to fill with the muted sounds of stirring life, sniffles, grumbles, the thud of feet against the dirt, you see someone emerge from a curtained corner at the far end. Probably the house elder. She's wearing a cloak over her night tunic, hair braided even in sleep, and carries a carved wooden staff she clearly doesn't need for walking. She surveys the room like a sleepy general. Her bench, you'll notice, is the closest to the hearth, the warmest, the quietest. She earned that spot. Nobody argues. You notice something else too, a small child being gently wrapped by their mother and placed back onto the sleeping bench, tucked in as the cold seeps back in through the seams of morning. Even with the fire rekindled, the Longhouse isn't instantly warm. It takes hours to reach a comfortable glow again. Until then, the blankets stay on, the benches remain occupied, and the world stays small. And honestly, that's the point. Viking sleep wasn't about individual comfort, it was about shared survival. A system built on benches, layers, and the quiet closeness of community. You sleep together, you wake together, you keep each other warm, not just with furs and fire, but with presence. And as the Longhouse hums back to life slowly and softly, you realise that for all its discomforts, it worked. You slept. You lived. You didn't freeze to death in your sleep. And in Viking Scandinavia, that's the only review that matters. You're standing now, barefoot on packed earth, knees still a little stiff from sleeping like a rolled-up animal, and it hits you how much effort it takes just to feel normal here. There's no morning coffee, no fuzzy slippers, no warm floorboards. There's just you, a heavy wool tunic, and a temperature that bites through your spine the second you leave your fur cocoon. Your breath still fogs in the air, and you instinctively pull your cloak tighter, thinking for a second that maybe you were warmer with the cow. And honestly, you probably were. Welcome to the Viking layering system, also known as how not to die overnight in Northern Europe. The principle is simple. Don't rely on a single garment to keep you warm. Stack it. Build it. Become a human onion. It starts with the underlayers. Linen, if you're lucky. Soft, surprisingly breathable, and not too itchy if you don't think about how rarely it's washed. On top of that goes your wool tunic, the main player in this thermal game of survival. The weave is thick, sometimes ribbed, sometimes twill, and while it doesn't exactly breathe, it holds in heat like it's paid to do it. Then come the pants, wool again. Rougher than you'd like, but if you tuck them into your leg wraps, those long bands of fabric spiraled from knee to ankle, you'll trap more warmth and lose less skin to the wind. Over all of that, your cloak, the real MVP. It's fastened with a brooch, draped across one shoulder, and thick enough to serve as both a sleeping bag and a portable house if you need it to. The best ones are lined with fur, fox, bear or sheep, depending on what you hunted, traded or inherited. If it smells a little like wet dog and old campfire, that's just the smell of staying alive. At night, all of this becomes your bedding. You don't take your clothes off to sleep, you add more. Woolen socks if you have them, mittens made from rabbit hide, and yes, possibly that fabled nightcap pulled down low over your ears so they don't freeze off mid-dream. You crawl under the furs already dressed for battle, not with swords, but with winter itself. You glance around and notice others doing the same. People who never truly got undressed, just rearranged the layers to fit the context. A man near the hearth is pulling on a second tunic over his first. A woman is wrapping her hair in cloth to keep it from becoming brittle with frost. Even the children are padded like little woolen dumplings, waddling stiff-legged as they try to help with morning chores. Everyone here has the same goal: retain warmth. If you're cold, it means you messed up your layering. That's your fault, not winter's. And while this all sounds functional, it wasn't just about survival. Viking clothing had style. Patterns were woven into the wool. Borders were dyed with plant-based pigments. Deep reds, earthy yellows, rare blues made from imported woad. Cloaks weren't just thrown on, they were tailored, pinned, draped with drama. You weren't just a shivering pile of human. No, you were a shivering pile of human with aesthetic. Even shoes, made from soft leather and stuffed with moss or fur, were often adorned with stamped patterns. You might be freezing, but at least you looked good doing it. Quirky fact time. Vikings sometimes used felted wool, boiled and compressed until it was thick enough to stop a blade or block the wind. Some surviving garments show layers of this armour-like fabric sewn into cloaks or wrapped around the chest. It wasn't just warmth, it was a wearable shield. Functional fashion, centuries before Gore-Tex or thermal base layers hit the scene. Still, the true brilliance of the Viking wardrobe isn't just the fabrics or designs, it's how modular it all is. You can adjust on the fly, peel off a layer when you're near the fire, stack more on when you head outside, wrap a cloak around your legs while sitting, or stuff spare wool under your tunic for bonus insulation. It's the original customizable loadout, and if something tears, you patch it. If it shrinks in the wash, well, let's be honest, no one's washing anything until spring. There's scholarly debate about exactly how many layers were typical. Some argue that 2 or 3 were the max. You didn't want to sweat too much and risk freezing when it cooled again. Others think that during the colder stretches of winter, people layered as much as physically possible, with bedding doubling as clothing and vice versa. Honestly, from where you're standing, in a drafty longhouse with your breath fogging up like a dragon, it feels safer to go with the second theory. Pile it on. Worry about style in the afterlife. You walk carefully to the fire, boots scuffing the dirt, and hold out your hands. The heat is modest but steady. Someone passes you a cup made from horn, filled with something warm, maybe broth, maybe ale that's been left near the hearth all night. You sip and feel it spread through your chest like liquid armour. Around you, the others are starting their day, but no one's rushing. It's a slow thaw, a gentle re-entry from the thick blanket of communal sleep. One of the older women nearby is folding a fur, carefully layering it back onto a bench for the next sleep cycle. You watch how she shakes it out, pats the dust free, and smooths the edges with a flat palm. There's an intimacy to the gesture, something practiced, habitual, almost sacred. These furs have names, memories, legacies. That sealskin blanket might have come from her husband's first hunt. That woolen wrap might have covered 3 generations of her family. And suddenly you realise layering isn't just about clothes or blankets. It's about memory, legacy. Every piece you wear or sleep under has a story, soaked in smoke, sweat, and survival. The fibres hold on to it. And now, so do you. So you wrap your cloak a little tighter, tuck your hands inside your sleeves, and settle near the fire again. You survived the night, yes. But more than that, you wore your history to bed and woke up wrapped in its warmth. In the Viking world, that's how you sleep, that's how you live. Word count 1101, awaiting continue. Section 9. You're back on the bench now, legs tucked beneath you, half wrapped in your cloak again as the fire continues its slow comeback. There's movement all around. People rising, tending to chores, checking on animals, but not everyone is up yet. Some are still burrowed deep in their furs, heads barely visible, breathing slow and steady. And as you glance around the longhouse, you start to notice just how tightly everyone sleeps. Not just near each other, but with each other. It's like a long human puzzle, every limb and shoulder fitting into another, forming an ecosystem of shared heat and body rhythms. Welcome to the Viking snuggle pile. It's not a cute accident. This is deliberate. You don't sleep alone in a longhouse unless you've seriously offended someone, or you're the kind of loner who likes testing your frostbite threshold. Sleeping together is a heat strategy. Human bodies radiate warmth, and the more of them pressed into the same few square feet, the more that heat gets trapped, recycled, and redistributed. The science is simple. The execution, less so. Especially when you realise you're now forehead to forehead with your second cousin and possibly a goat. The sleeping bench you used wasn't your bench, it was the bench, and it likely held 2 or 3 people at once. You slept shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, sometimes with one person acting as the outer wall against the cold. If you were small or young, you were tucked in the middle. If you were old and had earned your place, or just happened to snore aggressively, you got an edge seat close to the fire but far enough from the doorway not to catch the draft. And yeah, there was shuffling. Awkward elbow-in-the-face shuffling. But no one complained. Not because they were polite, because if you made enough noise to wake someone up, they might throw a wooden bowl at your head. And the intimacy wasn't limited to family. Depending on the size of the longhouse, guests or travellers would sometimes be slotted into any available bench space. You could go to sleep next to your spouse and wake up with a visiting merchant from Header Bay pressed up against your back. Comfort zones were non-existent. Personal space was a myth. The only rule? Don't steal the blanket. That was a punishable offence. And by punishable, I mean someone would probably sit on you until you got the message. You shift a little just thinking about it. The furs still clinging to your shoulders are warm from your own body heat, and for a brief moment you understand why sleeping next to someone, anyone, is better than facing that cold alone. This is not the romanticised Viking version with candlelit bedchambers and soft linen sheets. This is survival wrapped in damp wool and sibling elbows. One kid near the far end is still fast asleep, head tucked into the crook of an older sibling's arm. You can tell they've been sleeping together like this for years. They move as one, shifting in unison as the blanket slips or someone sighs. It's less a family unit and more like a human nest, each person contributing a little warmth, a little mass, a little comfort. And while it might seem chaotic or even uncomfortable, there's an odd peace to it. Like the kind of peace you feel when you're not alone, not just emotionally but physically surrounded by the same breath, the same heartbeat, the same shared need to stay warm and safe until morning. There's a quirky bit of folklore that says the Vikings believed sleeping in close quarters allowed their dreams to mingle, that spirits, or thoughts, or fragments of memory could drift between sleepers like smoke. No hard evidence for that, but it's an idea that stuck around in some Norse and later Icelandic tales. And when you think about how intertwined the nights were, how deeply entangled bodies became during the long sleep cycles of winter, it's not hard to imagine dreams seeping across skin and breath, whispering from one sleeper to the next. But even without the mysticism, the practical reasons for sleeping in a pile are compelling. Nights were long, like really long. During the dead of winter in places like northern Norway or Iceland, you might only get 3 or 4 hours of sunlight each day. The rest? Darkness, cold, stillness. And so, people didn't just sleep once per night. They slept in shifts, cycles, layered rest with storytelling, chores and quiet wakefulness. Sometimes they slept for 10 or 12 hours at a time, waking briefly in the middle to stoke the fire or tend to a crying child, then drifting back under the furs. You didn't go to bed the way we think of it. You became part of the sleeping organism that was the Longhouse, one shared breath, one rolling body of heat and exhaustion. And here's where the debate heats up, pun intended. Some historians argue that this communal sleeping wasn't just about heat, it was about surveillance. When everyone sleeps together, no one sneaks off unnoticed. No one plots, steals, or does something scandalous without someone else waking up and seeing it. Others push back, saying that Viking culture, while communal, still respected some boundaries, especially between families and unrelated guests. The truth probably is both. Close sleeping was necessity first, culture second, and whatever awkwardness followed was just accepted as the price of warmth. You press your hand to your cheek, still warm from your makeshift pillow, and wonder how people in these longhouses dealt with noise. The snoring alone must have been legendary. Add in the occasional animal sound, wind battering the walls, and the creaks of timber shifting under the weight of snow, and it's a wonder anyone got any sleep. But they did. They learned to listen past the noise, to embrace it. The chaos was part of the comfort, and you realise as you stretch your sore limbs and sip from a cup of barely warm broth, that sleeping in a Viking longhouse wasn't about perfect rest. It was about enough warmth to get through the night, enough body heat to keep fingers and toes intact, enough closeness to remind you you weren't alone in the dark. You pull your cloak around your shoulders again and glance toward the benches, now mostly empty. Someone's folding up a fur, someone else is airing out a straw-stuffed cushion by the smoke vent. Life continues, the longhouse exhales, and you, cramped, sore and slightly smelling of goat, feel, strangely, at peace. The door cracks open with a low groan, and an icy draught snakes in like it's been waiting all night for a chance to strike. Someone curses under their breath, probably the unlucky soul heading out to check on the latrine or bring in more wood, and quickly slams the heavy plank shut behind them. But that brief gust is enough to remind everyone just how well the longhouse holds the cold at bay. The difference is stark. Outside the wind slices, inside it settles. The heat may be uneven and smoke may sting your eyes now and then, but it's a fragile paradise compared to what waits just beyond the walls. Still, you're beginning to notice something else. The air inside isn't exactly crisp either. It's dense. There's a lingering haze that never quite lifts, hanging in the space just above head level. And it smells of wood smoke, charred fat, damp wool, breath, and bodies. The longer you sit in it, the more you understand the delicate balance between warmth and oxygen. And that brings us to one of the biggest mysteries of the longhouse. How did anyone breathe? Let's get one thing straight. There are no chimneys in here, not the kind you're thinking of. The Viking longhouse relied on a smoke hole, or, in some cases, a more porous roof, where the smoke could slowly filter out through layers of thatch or turf. It wasn't fast, it wasn't clean, it wasn't even especially efficient, but it worked well enough that most of the people inside didn't suffocate in their sleep. Usually. The air quality, however, was, let's call it atmospheric. You're essentially living in a low-grade smoker, where everything gets a nice smoky coating. Your clothes, your hair, your lungs. It stings your eyes in a way that makes blinking a little risky, but it also kills bacteria, preserves food, repels insects, and coats the beams in a protective layer that prevents rot. So yeah, you might develop a bit of a cough, but your longhouse isn't falling apart, your dried fish isn't going rancid, and your bedbugs are reconsidering their life choices. Some reconstructions suggest that the smoke hole was more of a concept than a feature. Instead of one big vent, the entire roof acted like a sponge, absorbing, filtering, and slowly releasing the smoke. That's not ideal for visibility, but it creates a stratified layer inside the house. Below the smoke, breathable air and the living space. Above it, the smoky no man's land where spiders go to retire. It's a bit like living in a fireplace, but a fireplace with rules and strategy. You duck your head instinctively as a wisp of smoke trails too low. Someone's just stoked the fire, and it's flaring up again, brighter, hotter, and a little more aggressive than it was meant to. That's the risk in a space like this. A slightly damp log or gust of wind through the door, and suddenly the house fills with thick, eye-watering smoke. People start coughing. Someone throws a wet rag over a log to calm it down. A kid sneezes in the corner, and a few adults chuckle with that been there kind of amusement. The longhouse has its own air system, but it's not mechanical. It's behavioural. Doors are opened carefully. Firewood is selected with almost religious scrutiny. Dry, seasoned, split just right. Fires are rarely allowed to burn high or fast. You want a slow, even flame, enough to generate heat and smoke, but not so much that you start melting your neighbours or waking up choking on ash. And ventilation, that's a group effort. In some households, it was someone's daily job to manage airflow, opening and closing wall slats, poking at the smoke vent with a stick, propping the door at just the right angle. These people weren't HVAC engineers, but they understood airflow on a primal level. Too much air, and the house gets cold. Too little, and everyone passes out like a bunch of smoked hams. There's still a scholarly argument simmering around this. Some historians believe longhouses were better ventilated than we give them credit for, that their design, while crude, reflected a deep understanding of thermodynamics and airflow. Others think the houses were death traps, and people just got used to living with a perpetual cough and minimal oxygen. Honestly, after spending even a single night here, you start to believe both theories. The place breathes, just not fast enough to clear your sinuses. But here's the thing. Smoke wasn't just a problem. It was a tool. It dried meat. It hardened beams. It even protected against pests. You'll notice the absence of flies in winter, not just because they've frozen into tiny bug cycles outside, but because smoke keeps them from nesting in every crevice. And then there's the smell. Yes, it lingers. But it also masks worse things. Sweat, rot, damp wool, and whatever unfortunate business the cow did in its pen last night. There's also a psychological effect. The smoke makes everything softer, dreamier. Light becomes diffused, blurred at the edges. You move through it like you're in a half dream, your vision slightly muted, your thoughts a little heavier. It's not just poor air, it's a filter on reality, a reminder that life here is layered and smudged and ancient. A woman nearby rubs her eyes, smearing soot across her cheek as she stretches. She doesn't even react. It's just normal. Soot on your face. That's how you know the house is working. If you woke up clean, something went terribly wrong. You pull your cloak tighter again and huddle a little closer to the fire. The air's starting to clear, just slightly, as the flames settle back into their familiar rhythm. You cough once, not dramatically, more out of habit. The taste of wood smoke lingers at the back of your throat, dry and bitter. But you're breathing, you're awake, and the longhouse, filled with smoke and steam and early morning shuffling, still holds steady. In the end, that's what it comes down to, control, not elimination. The Vikings didn't try to get rid of the smoke. They managed it. They lived in it. They used it. You're not meant to be perfectly comfortable here. You're meant to survive. and if your lungs have to do a little extra work to make that happen, well, so be it. You take another breath, thick, smoky, and ancient, and let it fill your chest. You're alive. The fire still burns, and the Longhouse, haze and all, is still breathing with you. You're hunched near the fire now, the heat gradually pulling sensation back into your fingertips. Around you, the Longhouse begins to hum with its quiet morning rhythm. Wood being split near the entrance, the dull thud of hooves as someone leads a goat outside for fresh air, the scrape of ladles against wooden bowls as breakfast takes shape. And as you sit there, watching steam curl from a pot of bubbling stew, it becomes clear that staying warm wasn't just about what you wore or where you slept. It was about what you ate. Vikings didn't count calories, they conquered them. Your modern diet, with its green smoothies and almond milk, isn't going to cut it out here. To survive these winters, you need fat, and lots of it. Protein, yes, but mostly fat. Animal fat, dairy fat, fish fat. Whatever could be rendered, melted, stewed, or stored. If it dripped and clung to your lips like it was trying to become part of your skin, it was probably on the menu. This morning's stew is typical. A thick, greasy broth filled with root vegetables, dried meat, and enough grease to float a longship. You sip it slowly, letting the heat creep down your throat into your core. The warmth doesn't just comfort, it activates. You can feel it fueling your limbs, your fingers, your foggy brain. This isn't just food, it's fuel. And it's been fueling Viking bodies for centuries. Their winter diet was all about longevity, foods that could last in storage without refrigeration, or better yet, improve with age. You're talking dried fish, salted lamb, smoked pork, fermented herring, hard cheese, and dense loaves of bread made from barley, rye, or oats. Fresh produce, not unless someone dug it out of a storage pit or raided a monastery for it. Instead, you relied on what your ancestors preserved: jars of pickled cabbage, onions, turnips. Fermentation wasn't just for flavour, it was refrigeration, gut health, and ritual all in one. And then there's the butter. Oh, the butter. Golden, hard-packed, often buried in clay pots and stored underground or in cellars carved into the earth. Some households had year-old butter, aged into a substance so strong it could practically walk itself to your plate. You might gag at the smell, but take a bite, and you're warm from the inside out. Vikings weren't delicate eaters. They didn't flinch at sour flavours or strange textures. They chased the food that would stick to their ribs, slow their digestion, and keep their body temperature from falling with the first gust of icy wind. You dip a chunk of bread into the stew and chew slowly, the dense crumb absorbing the fat like a sponge. No preservatives, no sugar, just survival in loaf form. Someone nearby eats straight from a carved wooden bowl, slurping noisily without shame. Others huddle in small groups, eating in silence or swapping gossip in low voices. It's not glamorous, it's not Instagrammable. But the warmth spreading through your gut right now, that's the Viking way of saying good morning. And here's where the quirky part kicks in. Recent analysis of coprolites, yes, fossilized poop, suggests that Vikings had surprisingly diverse diets, with traces of herbs, wild greens, and even exotic spices. That means somewhere in the world of salted fish and meat stew mornings, someone was sprinkling in wild garlic or imported black pepper like a proto-foodie. Imagine a burly raider, double-bladed axe in one hand, taste-testing soup with a suspicious look and muttering, "Needs time." It's not impossible. That doesn't mean everyone was eating like royalty. Food distribution was based on status. The head of the household, usually the oldest man or woman, got the best cuts, the biggest bowls, the richest servings. Children, servants, and guests got what remained. But even the scraps had calories, and calories meant warmth. You didn't need to love your meal, you just needed it to light a fire in your belly. There's debate among historians about how intentional this dietary science was. Did Vikings know that high-fat foods helped maintain body heat? Or did they just eat what tasted good and happen to survive the winter without spoiling? It's likely a bit of both. They understood what worked, even if they didn't have the modern nutritional vocabulary for it. No one was counting omega-3s, but they were eating fermented shark, which frankly takes more guts than a whole winter's worth of kale smoothies. You reach for another hunk of bread and swipe it through the stew, watching the surface shimmer with grease. Someone nearby offers a chunk of hard cheese, crumbly, salty, and sharp enough to wake your teeth up. There's no sugar, no sweets, nothing artificial to spike your energy and send you crashing later. This is slow-burning, heavy-hitting fuel. The kind that doesn't just warm you up, it builds you. And you needed it. After a day spent chopping wood, hauling water, herding goats, repairing fences, and dodging the very real threat of getting your foot stepped on by an angry cow, your body burned through calories like fire through kindling. Eating wasn't indulgence, it was maintenance. You didn't eat to enjoy, you ate to continue. Still, food had its rituals. Blessings were muttered, offerings were left at shrines. The first meal after a successful hunt might be shared communally, with stories and songs. Certain dishes were saved for holidays. Solstice feasts, Yule banquets, harvest rituals. A stew like the one you're eating now might be a daily staple, but toss in a little wild boar or a sprig of dill, and suddenly it's worthy of a feast. You slurp the last of the broth and sit back, belly full and chest warm. Around you, others do the same, letting out long, satisfied breaths. The fire crackles again, now fed with a few fresh logs, and the air feels heavier, but in a good way, like it's weighted with sustenance, safety, and shared experience. You still feel the cold creeping in around your ankles, but it no longer bites. Your body has enough fuel to fight back. You can feel it spreading through you, steadily, confidently, like a second hearth built inside your ribs. Food, fire, and fur. That's the Viking survival formula, not just during the day, but all through the night. Because when darkness lasts 16 hours and the temperature outside can crack your skin, you need more than a blanket. You need calories, fat, warmth that starts deep in your belly and climbs all the way out to your frozen toes. And tonight, when the fire burns low and the Longhouse slips back into its breathing slumber, you'll be ready. Not just wrapped in hides, but fortified, from the inside out. Evening settles back into the Longhouse like it never really left. The faint light outside, what passed for a winter afternoon, has faded again, leaving the wooden beams soaked in shadows and the edges of the room softening into dark. People have finished eating. The bowls are stacked or licked clean. The pot near the hearth still simmers with the remnants of the day's stew. There's no clinking of silverware, no hum of refrigerators or whir of anything electrical. Just the sound of low conversation, the occasional bark from the dog curled by the door, and the telltale slosh of something being poured into a cup with a little more intention than water, because now it's time for the Viking version of a nightcap. Ale, the drink of the Longhouse. Not the kind that comes chilled in a bottle with a label promising notes of citrus and pine. This is thick, murky, and barely filtered, with floating bits that may or may not have been supposed to be there. It's warm, earthy, and surprisingly low in alcohol compared to modern brews, not because they couldn't make stronger stuff, but because drinking strong alcohol on an empty stomach, in a smoky house full of open flames, next to your sleeping children and livestock. That's how you end up face down in the hearth. So Viking ale was weaker, meant for sipping, for sharing, for warming your throat before sleep. You're handed a horn, literally a horn, polished, hollowed, with a carved rim, and take a cautious sip. It's sour. Not unpleasantly so, but sharp enough to make your jaw twitch. It's probably barley-based, maybe flavoured with herbs like juniper or yarrow. Hops weren't common here yet. The bitterness comes from whatever someone foraged, dried, and boiled into the brew because it looked vaguely useful and didn't kill the last person who tried it. You sip again, slower this time. The warmth spreads, less like fire and more like kindling. A soft haze settles behind your eyes. Around you, others drink too, not to party, not to escape, but to settle. This is a soft ritual, a buffer between the weight of the day and the heaviness of night, a quiet way to slip into stillness. In the far corner, someone starts humming. An old tune, wordless, the kind that wobbles on the edge between lullaby and lament. It's not clear if it's for the children, or the gods, or just for themselves, but it hangs in the air like steam, rising up into the dark rafters. You close your eyes, the cup still warm in your hands, and listen. Ale in Viking culture wasn't just for drinking, it was currency, status, worship. It was brewed in large batches, often during seasonal festivals or right before winter, and stored in barrels that lived alongside everything else, tools, meat, the occasional sleeping goat. It was used in toasts to ancestors, to gods, to oaths and victories. Sharing ale meant trust. It meant belonging, even if the brew tasted like it had been strained through a wool sock. And when the nights were long, when the snow piled up outside the door and you were stuck indoors with the same 30 people for weeks on end, ale helped. It blurred the edges of the cold, dulled the sore spots in your shoulders, softened the harshness of constant proximity. You couldn't escape your family, but with a little drink you could tolerate your uncle's stories one more time. Of course, not every drinker was responsible. There are sagas full of warnings about men who drank too deeply, spoke too freely, challenged someone to a duel in the middle of dinner. The ale horn was a social tool, but it could also tip the balance. There were rules. Who drank first? Who refilled whose cup? How many toasts before things got dangerous? Ignore those, and you risked more than a hangover. You risked shame, and in Viking society that was often worse than injury. There's even a fringe theory floating around that ale was used strategically at bedtime, not just for warmth or pleasure, but as a sleep aid. Think about it. No blackout curtains, no melatonin gummies, no ambient ocean sounds, just noise, smoke, cold, and the occasional drafty wallboard. A mild, warming drink could smooth the edges, slow your thoughts, quiet the background worry that tomorrow's hunt might come up short, or that the storm outside might tear half the roof off. Was it healthy? Probably not. Was it effective? Definitely. As you sip the last of your horn and hand it back, you feel it. The haze beginning to settle over the Longhouse. The fire's light has dimmed from gold to ember, casting long, lazy shadows. People are quieter now. Some already lie down, furs pulled up, their breath slow and steady. You hear a few quiet jokes, a soft laugh, a sigh. Someone near the door mumbles a short prayer to Thor or Freya, maybe for protection, maybe just out of habit. You curl up again in your bench, pulling the heavy fur over your chest, the smell of smoke and wool now familiar, almost comforting. Your body is heavy, in a good way, full from dinner, warmed from drink, layered against the cold with the same clothes you'll probably wear tomorrow. You wiggle your toes to remind yourself they're still there, and they are, tingly and grateful. It's not glamorous, this life. It's rough and smoky, loud and intimate and deeply, relentlessly physical. But there's a strange comfort in it, in the way everyone settles down together, in the shared firelight, in the knowledge that everyone else is breathing the same thick air under the same sagging roof, dreaming beside the same snoring cow. Outside, the wind picks up again. You can hear it clawing at the turf, testing the strength of the roof, rattling against the door like a bored god with nothing better to do. But inside, you're safe. You're full. You're wrapped in the heat of your own body and the bodies around you, in a space that's held generations before you and will likely hold generations after. You close your eyes. The warmth of the ale lingers, fading now, traded in for the deeper, slower warmth of sleep. The Longhouse breathes with you, slow, steady, smoky. And just like that, the night begins again. Sleep comes in layers here, just like everything else. You slip into it not all at once, but gradually, drifting down through warmth, through the haze of ale, through the low murmur of fire and breathing bodies. At first it's a surface doze, light, porous, easy to interrupt. But slowly the sounds of the Longhouse smooth into something else, a rhythm, a soundscape not unlike a lullaby if you squint at it sideways and ignore the occasional goat grunt. The Longhouse sings its own bedtime song, and whether you want to or not, your body listens. The first thing you notice is the timber. The beams above you creak with their own old language. Not loud, not threatening, just a low, resonant groan as the house settles into the cold, like an old man stretching before sleep. The beams swell and contract with the fire's heat and the outside chill, responding to weather and weight. You've never paid much attention to wood in your modern life, but here it's alive. It complains gently, it sighs, and in the quiet that sound becomes a comfort. Then there's the wind outside, pressing its frozen face against the turf roof, growling around the edges of the house. The walls hold it back, but just barely. You can hear the wind's claws dragging across the surface, looking for cracks. Sometimes it howls, sometimes it whispers, but always it reminds you that the Longhouse is the only thing between you and the vast, unfeeling night. It's a hostile lullaby, but an honest one. Closer in, you begin to tune into the sounds inside the house, the fire crackling softly in the centre, occasionally shifting a log with a sudden snap that makes someone stir in their sleep. The slow, uneven chorus of breathing, snorts, snuffles, light snores. Someone clears their throat in the dark. A child whimpers in a dream, and a parent murmurs something soothing, barely more than a breath. And the animals. You cannot forget the animals. One of the cows exhales loudly, like it's offended by the draught that crept under its straw. A chicken rustles feathers. Somewhere near your feet, a goat lets out a low, satisfied grunt that's both absurd and, oddly, reassuring. These aren't background noises. They're part of the ecosystem. In the Longhouse, everything is shared. The warmth, the air, the food, the noise. If you're thinking this doesn't sound like the ideal sleep environment, you're not wrong. By modern standards, it's chaotic. No soundproofing, no blackout curtains, no white noise machine. Just a blend of life, all of it jostling and groaning and breathing around you, and yet it works. Because none of it is unexpected. There are no sudden alarms, no shrill rings, no startling vibrations from a phone under your pillow. Everything here is predictable, organic, so your brain doesn't resist it. It sinks, accepts, folds into the collective rhythm of the house. And here's the truly strange part. The noise helps. In a world where darkness could mean danger, real, hungry danger, noise is proof of life, of community. If you woke up in complete silence, you'd panic. You'd assume something terrible had happened. The sounds remind you that you're not alone, that the Longhouse is still here, still breathing. This is where the scholarly debate creeps in. Some researchers believe that the human nervous system evolved to find comfort in these sounds, that communal living, sleeping close to others, hearing their breath, their murmurs, even their farts, activated some deep biological reassurance. That part of your brain that watches for predators calms down when it hears the tribe nearby. Others argue it's just conditioning. If you grow up in a house full of noise, it becomes the lullaby by default. Silence, then, is unnatural. It feels wrong. But either way, lying here under your heavy fur wrap, you get it. Your heartbeat syncs with the fire's pulse. Your breath slows to match the rhythm of those around you. You're warm. Not the artificial warmth of a thermostat, but the hard-earned kind. Food-fed, fire-built, shared. Even the smell plays a role. It's not pleasant, not by any stretch, but it's consistent. Smoke, damp wool, straw, sweat, and the ever-present undertone of animals. Together, it creates a scent your body comes to recognize as safe. The first time you lay down here, it was overwhelming, but now, it's almost comforting. This is what safety smells like in the Northlands. One of the oddest, most unexpected sounds floats through the dark. Someone humming, very faint, off-key, probably not meant to be heard. Maybe a mother soothing a restless child, or an elder reliving a tune from years ago. The melody is old, wobbly, more breath than tone, but it twists through the smoke and hangs in the air like a memory. You don't know the words, but you don't need to. It's the kind of sound that tells you everything is okay, or at least as okay as it's going to be. Eventually you start to feel your mind do what everyone else's already has, drift. You become less aware of the goat next to your legs, less focused on the fire's glow. Your eyes are closed without realizing it, and your last thoughts are loose. Strange things, scraps of stories told around the hearth, images of snow-covered trees, of ships rocking in the dark. You're still aware of the Longhouse, just barely. A creak here, a shift there, a sudden snore, but it all sounds distant now, like someone else's dream bleeding into your own. You roll slightly, cocooned in fur, and let the rhythm of the house pull you under. There's no silence here, not really. But the noise doesn't bother you. It holds you, cradles you. And as you drift fully into sleep, the Longhouse wraps around you like another layer of wool. You'll wake up stiff. You'll wake up smelling like smoke and sheep. But for now, you sleep. And for Vikings, that's the victory. You wake again, not with a jolt, but with that slow, heavy blink of someone who's spent too many hours wrapped in furs and breathing warm, recycled air. It's dark still night, still winter, but something's different. The Longhouse isn't fully asleep anymore. It's in that murky, uncertain space between rest and routine. You sit up slightly, limbs stiff and blanket warmed, and you realize this is the middle. Not morning, not night, just that strange, quiet hour Viking sleepers knew well, even if they didn't have a name for it. See, for all our modern belief in the sacred 8-hour sleep block, the people in this longhouse are doing things a little differently. Instead of one long stretch of unconsciousness, they divide their rest into 2 segments. First sleep, then a waking period, then second sleep. It's a natural rhythm shaped by darkness itself. Here in the Norse winter, when the sun appears for only a teasing sliver of time each day, the body stops pretending it understands time at all. The first sleep carries you into midnight or so, and then, just like now, you wake, not panicked, not fully alert, just present. It's not insomnia, it's intermission. Some people stir and roll over, others rise quietly without fuss. A man stretches near the hearth, pokes at the embers, and throws on a new log with a grunt so soft it barely registers as a sound. The fire sighs in response, flaring a little. The longhouse adjusts. In this pocket of time, small things happen. A woman sits up near the back and mends a torn hem with a needle glinting in the firelight. Someone else crouches over a pile of wool, teasing it into strands for tomorrow's weaving. There's a couple whispering in the corner, too quiet to hear what's being said but unmistakably deep in some secret or soft argument. This hour doesn't belong to labour or rest. It belongs to thought, introspection, connection. It's the hour where things are said that would feel strange in daylight. Historians have argued over this segmented sleep pattern for years. Some point to references in medieval texts, mentions of first sleep and second sleep, as if it were common knowledge. Others say it was purely circumstantial, shaped by the extreme dark and slow pace of life in pre-industrial societies. But here, in the longhouse, you're living proof that it makes sense. When the fire burns low and your belly is full, your body naturally goes dormant. And when you've had a few hours of that heavy, dream-laced rest, your eyes open again, not confused but curious. There's even talk in some of the old texts that this in-between period was the best time for spiritual work. Prayer, reflection, talking to the gods, or the ancestors, or whatever spirits happen to be listening. Dreams during the first sleep were thought to be shallow, mere echoes. But dreams that came after the waking period? Those were said to carry messages. You watch the people around you, their movements deliberate and unhurried. It's not just insomnia turned social. It's a rhythm, a culture, a way of living in harmony with the dark instead of fighting it. There are no candles to force wakefulness, no screens to hijack your brain chemistry, just the natural ebb and flow of bodies responding to their world. It's like breathing. Inhale, first sleep, exhale, wake, then back into the deep. And in this strange hour, time stretches. A few minutes feel like an hour feels like a dream. You lie back again, eyes open, watching the ceiling fade into nothingness. The roof above you is quiet now. The wind outside has calmed, and for a moment the longhouse feels suspended, adrift in the dark. A ship with its sail furled, resting on black water. This might also be the time for other things. Yes, those things. The quiet intimacy between couples. Privacy is relative in a longhouse, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Furs are pulled over heads. Hushed giggles ripple from shadowy corners. It's nothing dramatic or disruptive, just human. Warmth, in more ways than one, is a survival strategy. But not everyone is paired off. Some simply sit up to think, to pray, to poke at the fire and ponder the future. You see a boy sitting with his knees drawn up, eyes glassy with half-formed thoughts. He's probably imagining summer, or wondering if the fjord will thaw early this year, or thinking of someone who's not here anymore. There's something beautifully human about this quiet hour. No one tells you to wake up. No one tells you to stay in bed. The body simply knows. It needs time to drift, to reflect, to process the day in slow motion. In our world, we fill that time with phone screens and light pollution. But here in the dark, you have only the crackle of fire and your own thoughts, and they're louder than you'd expect. You pull the fur up to your chin again, not out of cold, but out of instinct. The body relaxes in stages. You're not ready to sleep again just yet, but you're close. The warmth is still there, clinging to your skin, soaked into your clothes. The weight of the blankets is familiar now, heavy, but comforting. The smoke above your head still curls like mist in a dream. Someone near the hearth sets down their cup, wraps a cloak tighter, and climbs back onto a bench. They don't need to announce their second sleep. It just happens. Their breathing slows, their hand goes slack. A few minutes later, another body follows, then another. You don't fight it. Your thoughts dim. The noises around you blend back into background texture. The creak of the roof, the shudder of the embers, the low rhythmic breath of the person beside you. The longhouse shifts again, from wakefulness into silence, into something deeper. This isn't sleep as you know it. This is a return, a descent. You're being pulled under gently with no resistance. The second sleep is slower, longer, deeper. The kind that heals muscles and calms the frantic drumbeat of survival. It carries no dreams, just stillness. And so you drift. Back into the warmth, into the breath of the longhouse, into the rhythm that everyone here knows, even if no one speaks of it. First sleep, wake, second sleep. The house accepts you again without a sound. You wake again, for the second or maybe third time. It's hard to tell anymore. The longhouse is still dark, but it has that subtle shift in energy, that feeling in the air that things are beginning to stir. The fire is not dead, but it's down to a smouldering glow, low orange coals that pulse like the heartbeat of a sleeping animal. People are still tucked under furs and cloaks, bodies curled into one another, but here and there someone shifts. You can hear the creak of a bench, the rustle of straw, the soft muttering of someone speaking not to another person, but perhaps to something unseen. Because in this strange, timeless cocoon of the longhouse, there's something else wrapped in the dark besides warmth and smoke. Belief. You can feel it. Not just the superstition that keeps charms tucked into the beams or the carved runes above the door. This is deeper, older, the kind of belief that whispers when you can't see the walls, that listens when you think you're alone. Vikings didn't separate the sacred from the practical. Protection wasn't just a strong roof and a warm cloak. It was also the old symbols etched into the wood, the runes burned into bed frames, the bits of bone, iron and amber braided into clothing, or hung from rafters like offerings. These were the invisible reinforcements of the longhouse. And now, in the stillness before dawn, when dreams linger like fog and the world feels thin, you can feel the old protections pressing in. You shift on your bench, drawing your fur tighter, and glance toward the door. There, nailed into the lintel, is a carved rune. The thorn, a symbol tied to Thor. Not just the hammer-throwing thunder god of Marvel movies, but the real one, the one people called upon when the wind howled too loudly and the snow wouldn't stop falling. Thor wasn't about flashy heroics. He was about protection, endurance, getting through another night. And that's the energy here. Quiet faith. You won't find temples in this longhouse. No priests in robes chanting at altars. What you'll find instead are small, powerful things. A tiny Thor's hammer carved from iron and worn around the neck of a sleeping elder. A piece of antler painted with red pigment and tucked into the beams. A pouch of herbs under a child's blanket sewn into the corner like a secret. These aren't just decorations, they're shields. And their power comes not from spectacle, but from repetition. From belief handed down through generations, not in sermons, but in whispered stories told in the low light of a fire. That's the way it works here. The sacred slips in quietly. It settles into the seams of the longhouse like smoke. One woman near the fire begins to murmur softly, her fingers tracing something invisible in the air. A prayer, maybe, or a charm. It's not for show. She's not trying to impress anyone. This is just what you do when you've made it through another night and the cold still presses at the door. You say thanks, or you ask for strength, or you whisper the name of someone who didn't wake up yesterday and hope they made it safely to the other side. And here's the strange, quirky detail that would probably confuse any outsider. These charms weren't always for protection from things. Sometimes they were meant to invite spirits in. Not evil ones, just ancestors, helpful dead. Family who might still be listening, still watching. You wouldn't want them to feel forgotten, so you leave out a piece of bread. You carve their initials into a beam. You tell their stories by the fire, even if no one remembers exactly how they died. In this house, the past isn't gone. It's woven into the walls. There's debate, of course. Scholars argue over what's real and what's been romanticized. Were these charms truly religious, or were they just tradition? Did people believe in their power, or were they old habits, carried out for comfort's sake? But here, wrapped in your fur and watching the emberlight flicker over a carved bone hanging from the rafter, it doesn't really matter. You feel it. The longhouse is not just protected by its architecture. It's protected by intention, by memory, by faith. And if that faith was occasionally practical, if people tucked a carved rune into their bedding not just for luck, but because it made them sleep easier, well, that counts too. The psychological effect of belief is warmth in itself. You notice, tucked into a crack in the beam beside you, a small object. It's barely bigger than your thumb. A piece of polished stone wrapped in wool thread. You don't touch it. You just look. Someone placed it there for a reason. Maybe it belonged to a child. Maybe it was a token from a lost sibling. Maybe it's just a favourite stone, believed to bring good dreams. Either way, it belongs. That's how it works here. Meaning isn't declared. It's understood. You lie back again, your head resting against the fur, your breath soft in the cold air. You feel the weight of the charms around you, not physically, but in the way the Longhouse holds the dark. It doesn't fight it. It absorbs it, softens it, fills it with memory and murmur and the slow, calm faith of people who have survived 1,000 nights just like this one. Outside, you hear the wind begin to pick up again, brushing against the sod roof with a long, hollow exhale. It rattles the bones of the Longhouse just enough to make the walls sigh. But inside, you're still wrapped in that invisible cocoon. Layers of fur, smoke and faith. You close your eyes again. You're not afraid. Not because the cold has disappeared, or the wind has stopped, but because the house is protected, not just with turf and timber, but with memory, with marks, with belief. And when you drift back into sleep this time, it's a different kind of sleep. Not just rest, not just survival, it's trust. The next time you wake, the first thing you feel isn't the cold, it's warmth. Not the kind that comes from fire or furs, or that third bowl of goat stew you definitely regret. No, this is the quiet warmth of another body pressed against yours. Not close in a romantic way, just there. Someone's shoulder against yours, their arm partly tucked under the same blanket, their breath tickling the back of your neck, and it's completely normal. Welcome to the sleep hierarchy of the Viking Longhouse. This wasn't just a matter of who slept where, it was who got the heat. And in winter, that was more valuable than food or weapons or even mead. The Longhouse wasn't a democracy when it came to bedtime. It had its own unspoken rules and they were brutally logical. The warmest spots, those prime, toasty real estate zones, were reserved for the most vulnerable, children, elders, the sick. And sometimes, sure, the powerful. Because power and vulnerability often took turns in Viking society. You sit up slowly, careful not to wake the child still half draped across your legs. She's maybe 5, still asleep, her face smudged with ash, mouth slightly open in that dreamless heavy way that only children and the terminally exhausted can manage. She's warm, like a personal campfire. Her hair is tangled, her tunic stained, but she radiates heat like a living ember, and you realise now, that's why she's here. Someone tucked her in beside you for your sake as much as hers. It's not sentiment, it's strategy. Viking families knew how to work the human heat map. Children, with their small, furnace-like bodies, were placed at the centre of sleep clusters, not just for protection, but for temperature regulation. They were heat sources, affection magnets, and a reminder of why everyone was still trying so hard to survive. Next to you, the child's mother lies asleep, her arm draped protectively across her daughter's side. Her position, like yours, is peripheral. Not right up against the fire, but not out in the drafty limbo near the door either. She's young, healthy, and probably up early most mornings to milk the goats or mend a fence or stir the morning porridge. She doesn't need the warmest spot. She just needs a place close enough to the heat to be safe and far enough to give it to someone else. Then there's the elder near the fire, the matriarch, the queen of warmth. She's not moving yet, just a lump under a heavy bearskin, probably dreaming about better times or calculating exactly how many logs she'll let people take from the pile today. Her bench is the best one, near the central hearth, high off the ground, with no foot traffic around it. That's no accident. She's not just being respected, she's being preserved. The Viking sleep hierarchy was flexible, sure, but it was also efficient. If you were strong and healthy, you expected to earn your warmth, by tending fires, hauling wood, or simply putting up with the cold. If you were weak, sick, or aging, the group compensated. It wasn't charity, it was insurance. Help the old survive now, and maybe someone will keep you warm in 20 winters. And this hierarchy extended to guests. A travelling merchant or visiting relative might be granted a spot near the fire out of honour or necessity, but a stranger, someone unvouched for? They were sleeping by the door near the animals under whatever blanket was still dry. Again, not cruel, just cautious. That door was a vulnerability. Anyone sleeping closest to it had to be alert enough to deal with intruders, wolves, or drunk cousins stumbling in late from a snowstorm. There's even speculation that some houses used a rotation system. That's right, hot bunking, Viking style. If someone left for hunting or travel, another member of the household would claim their sleeping spot, not because they wanted to, but because no heat was wasted. The bench was still warm. Why let it go cold? You wouldn't waste firewood. Why waste body heat? Archaeological sites back this up. Longhouses often had fewer sleeping benches than total occupants, which suggests they were sharing spaces, sleeping in shifts, overlapping like bricks in a wall. Everyone had a place, but that place was fluid. What mattered was the balance, the survival of the group, not your personal bedtime preference. Of course, this kind of system came with its awkward moments. You're going to bump into someone, you're going to accidentally kick an uncle in the shin or roll over onto your cousin's hair braid. But it wasn't seen as inappropriate, it was necessary. You slept where you were needed, you brought your warmth where it would help the most. And children, they had no fixed bedtime, no separate nursery. They slept when they were tired and woke when they were done. Sometimes they were wrapped in their own small fur bundles. Sometimes they were tucked into cradles hung from the rafters, gently rocked by the natural movement of the house. Footsteps, wind, shifting weight on the benches. These cradle swings weren't just clever. They were insulation, suspended in warm air, away from drafts and cold ground. Just one more way the Longhouse worked to keep its tiniest inhabitants alive. You look back down at the child still sleeping across your lap. Her brow twitches. She stirs, then rolls away without waking, her small form curling up into the bend of her mother's side. The warmth goes with her. Your legs feel immediately colder. You sigh and tug your cloak tighter. That's how it works. You don't cling to comfort, you pass it along. Because in the Viking Longhouse, warmth isn't a possession, it's a shared resource. It moves to where it's needed most. And if that means sleeping beside someone who talks in their sleep or drools onto your sleeve, you deal with it. The Longhouse isn't just about shelter. It's a body, a system. Every sleeper is part of its circulation. Every breath, every shared blanket, every repositioned child keeps the whole machine running. And as the fire crackles again and the morning inches closer, you understand your place in that system. You're not the cold, lone figure fighting the night. You're one part of the warmth, passed from shoulder to shoulder. You lie back down, even though the chill is returning to your side. You know someone else will drift over. Maybe a sleepy brother, maybe a dog, maybe just the memory of heat held in the furs. But you'll be warm again. The house will see to it. You hear the change in breath before anything else. A soft wheeze, shallow and uneven, coming from across the Longhouse. It's the kind of sound that skips the ears and goes straight to the spine. Something you know instinctively isn't right. You sit up slowly, careful not to disturb the warm layers of fur still draped over you, and squint through the smoke and dim firelight. There, by the hearth, near the elder's bench, is a shape curled tighter than the rest, unmoving, yet unmistakably awake. It's the sound of someone sick, and in this place, at this time, illness is more than inconvenience. It's a warning. You pull your cloak tighter and walk the short distance across the room, steps soft on the packed earth. The man lying there, older, wrapped in too many blankets, face slick with sweat despite the chill in the air, looks up as you approach. He doesn't speak, just nods once, tired, grateful. You crouch next to him and feel the heat coming off his body like he's been absorbing the fire all night, and now radiates it in unnatural waves. He's burning up, but his hands are cold. This is what sickness looks like in a Viking longhouse. There are no hospitals, no disinfectant, no sterile rooms or running water. The closest thing to medical care is what you can carry in a pouch. Herbs, moss, lard, garlic, dried roots. You know this man's name. He's not a stranger. He worked the fishing nets last month, laughed louder than anyone during the Yule feast. Now he lies still while the house tries not to notice how shallow his breath has become. The woman beside him, his wife probably, sponges his forehead with a rag dipped in warm water, scooped directly from the hearth pot. Her face is set, calm in the way only someone who's done this before can be. She mutters under her breath, maybe a prayer, maybe a list of ingredients for the next concoction. Beside her, a shallow bowl holds a thick greenish mash, herbs and sheep fat and something that smells faintly like mouldy bark. Viking medicine wasn't all guesswork, though it's tempting to think it was. There was knowledge here, hard-won, passed down, observed. Women were often the healers, skilled in herbal remedies, wound care, and the application of heat or cold. They used yarrow for wounds, juniper for cleansing, and moss, not just any moss, but sphagnum moss, as a natural antiseptic. In fact, that moss is still recognised today for its antimicrobial properties. Turns out Grandma knew what she was doing. But when it came to internal illness, coughs, fevers, breath that rattled in the throat, treatment was less clear. Warm liquids, honey if you had it. Prayers and charms, absolutely. You might even call in a Sedkona, a sorceress, if things got bad enough. Not a wizard with a wand, but someone who walked the line between the physical and spiritual, who might chant over the sick or place protective runes around the bed. Whether it cured the illness or not, it made people feel like they had a shot at survival, and sometimes that belief was enough. There's a small bundle of carved bones tied to the bedpost with red thread. A charm, obviously. Maybe dedicated to Air, the goddess of healing, or maybe just a nameless spirit the family believes still lingers nearby. Some Norse people believed illness was caused by etins, dark spirits, or even by the displeasure of ancestors, which meant that healing required not just herbs, but atonement, a sacrifice, a whispered apology, a promise to do better. You stay near the man for a moment, watching the way his breath catches every few cycles. He's not dying, not yet, but it's close, and in a longhouse like this, where bodies sleep close, breathe the same thick air, touch the same blankets, sickness isn't personal, it's communal. You don't just worry for him, you worry for everyone else, the children, the elder, yourself. Which is why there are quiet measures in place. The sick are brought closer to the hearth, not for comfort, but for control. The fire purifies the air, dries the sweat, and if it's something contagious, the warmth might help them sweat it out faster, though it also keeps their breath from turning to frost in the cold and settling back into the lungs of someone nearby. There's debate among scholars about how contagious illness spread in these longhouses. Some argue that the communal sleeping arrangements made epidemics inevitable. Others point out that the smoke, oddly enough, may have served as a deterrent, a natural disinfectant. Airborne bacteria struggle in smoky, low-oxygen environments, which means your constant coughing and eye-watering may actually be the thing keeping you alive. That, and sheer stubbornness. A boy brings a cup of broth over, just meat water, but warm and comforting, and helps the sick man drink. His hands are careful, practiced. He's done this before. The man swallows slowly, then exhales, the breath rattling again. But there's colour in his cheeks now, a spark. He might pull through, and if he does, it'll be because of this. These tiny efforts, a sip of broth, a cloth on the head, a whispered charm tied with thread. Back on your bench, you pull your cloak around you again. It still smells of fire, of wool, of someone else's skin. You're warm, still healthy. But now you understand the fragile balance of it all. One infection, one fever, one bad winter, and suddenly, the Longhouse isn't just a haven. It's a crucible. And yet, no one panics. No one separates the sick into a hut or tosses them out into the snow. The Longhouse tightens, pulls them closer, not because it's safe, but because it's right. Survival isn't a solo act here, it's shared. And if you're warm tonight, it's because someone else gave up their place near the fire for you last week. That's the lesson. Illness doesn't divide this house, it binds it. So you settle back into your spot, the weight of the air heavier now, but not in a way that frightens you. You'll sleep, you'll breathe, you'll share the heat, and in the morning you'll check on the man by the fire again. Because this isn't just a roof, it's a circle, and you're in it now. The next time your eyes open, it's darker than before. Not from nightfall, but from the thick cover of smoke blanketing the ceiling like an extra roof. The fire's been allowed to dip into glowing embers again, casting the Longhouse in deep oranges and reds, soft and slow, like a painting come alive. You feel your breath before you see it, a faint puff of warmth in the cold air. Around you, the room is still, not asleep, not awake. waiting. And then you hear it, the low, unmistakable growl of something outside the longhouse. It's not a man, it's not a cow. This sound is feral, low, rasping, punctuated by a sharp crack of snow and brush underfoot, or paw. Someone stiffens across the room. You hear the shift of fur, the soft inhale of breath. Another sound follows, a rustle near the door, quick and then gone. Silence again. Your stomach tightens. Not with fear, not exactly, but with that animal awareness you don't get to feel in modern life. That ancient twitch in the spine that says you are not alone out there. And just like that, it's your turn. Someone gives a low whistle, a signal. You're up. That's the rule. You're part of the rotation now, the nighttime watch, the Viking version of a graveyard shift, except the graves are still outside and hopefully staying that way. You throw your cloak around your shoulders and ease off the bench, feet hitting the cold earth like wet stone. The draft at floor level is biting, but you don't complain. You just step carefully toward the door, past the low wooden pens where the animals have gone quiet, past a row of sleeping bodies wrapped in blankets that now look like lumps of moss. No one stirs. No one volunteers to take your place. That's the system. Each night someone watches while the others sleep. Not because of raiders, that's more of a coastal problem, and tonight you're far inland, but because the wild doesn't go to bed just because you did. Wolves, primarily. Maybe a bear this time of year, if it was woken early by hunger. Sometimes worse, men who want what you have or think you're too tired to fight for it. But wolves are the most likely. Winter sends them closer to human homes, sniffing around the walls, testing the edges of your world. You unlatch the door slowly, feeling the crude iron hinge resist, and step out into the cold. Immediately your skin shrinks. The air outside is 10 times colder than it was inside, sharp and dry and howling straight into your bones. Snow crunches underfoot. The wind slaps your face without apology, but the sky is clear. Stars above you sparkle like scattered shards of ice. The moon, a thin sliver, peeks from behind a cloud, offering just enough light to see the ridgeline of the house, the small paddock beyond, the thin trail leading into the woods. You stand still for a long moment, listening. It's not dramatic. This isn't a movie where a beast lunges from the trees. Most watch shifts are quiet. You pace the perimeter. You keep the fire fed. You listen for the difference between regular forest sounds and something else. And yes, sometimes you catch a wolf staring from the tree line. Yellow eyes, silent, waiting. Not for you, maybe. Just for weakness. But if it sees you first, it usually leaves. It respects the standing watch. For now. The idea of the nighttime watch isn't just practical. It's cultural. In Norse society, vigilance was a virtue. The gods themselves were said to keep watch through the night. Odin, the all-seeing wanderer, who traded an eye for wisdom. Heimdall, the guardian of the Bifrost, who could hear grass grow and see for hundreds of leagues. Keeping watch wasn't just a chore, it was participation in a sacred tradition. You weren't just guarding the house, you were standing in the place of gods. Inside, you know the others sleep on, trusting the creak of the door and the sound of your boots to keep them safe. If something happens, if a wolf makes it to the threshold or the fire drops too low, it's your hand that stokes the flame or raises the alarm. If a child cries in their sleep, you step in first. You are the eyes of the house tonight, and there's a certain stillness that comes with that. Solitude isn't common in Viking life. You live together, eat together, sleep together. Space is communal, and privacy is a rare luxury. But out here, in the silent cold, the solitude is complete. You can feel your breath, hear your heart. The house is behind you, silent now. The forest is in front of you, patient and endless. There's a strange kind of peace to it. A cold, brittle calm that stretches through the snow, under the sky, into your bones. You understand now why some warriors preferred to sleep under stars, why some old men took their last walks in the dead of night. The cold strips everything away but what's essential. Still, you're not trying to be poetic about this. Your toes are freezing, your fingers are stiff, and your nose is leaking in slow, rhythmic betrayal. But you hold your place. You check the roof, the corners of the walls. You toss a fresh log into the fire pit and watch as it hisses and flares. You wait. Eventually you step back inside. Not all the way, just into the threshold, enough to feel the warmth start to creep back into your limbs. The longhouse hasn't stirred. Everyone's still bundled in their makeshift nests. You brush the snow from your shoulders and sit near the hearth. letting the heat soak into your boots. You don't plan to sleep, not yet. Just rest your eyes, just until the next person takes their turn, because you've kept the watch. You've seen the edge of the forest. You've stood where the others couldn't. And now, for a few more hours, the Longhouse can sleep a little deeper. The next time the fire cracks loud enough to jolt your eyes open, it's still dark, but darker in that specific way that only happens before dawn. A dense, inky kind of dark that feels like it's folding in on itself. You're back inside now, cloaked in warmth again, though your toes still haven't forgiven you for stepping out into the night. Around you, the Longhouse is stirring softly, the sleep cycle uncoiling like a lazy bear. Not with abrupt movements or loud voices, just slow shifts, gentle stretching, the occasional muttered curse as someone realizes how stiff their back is after 8 hours on a straw bench. And that's when it begins. Not chores, not eating, storytelling. It starts in a hush, barely a murmur, an older voice, low and gravelly, speaking through the thick air. You can't see who it is at first, but you don't need to. The tone is enough. It's not conversation, it's narrative. Everyone's ears perk just slightly, heads turn toward the sound. One child, still tucked under their fur blanket, raises their head like a rabbit sensing something magical. The voice continues, weaving its way through the Longhouse like smoke. This is how stories live in the Viking world. Not bound in books, not painted on parchment, but spoken, lived, passed from mouth to mouth like warmth itself. The voice you're hearing might belong to a skald, a kind of oral historian, poet and chronicler rolled into one. But more likely, it's just an elder who's been around long enough to remember the right way to say things. Because in this culture, stories aren't just entertainment, they're a duty, a lineage. Tonight's tale isn't one of the grand epics, at least not at first. It's not Ragnarok or Odin sacrificing his eye. It's a smaller story, closer to home. Something about a bear that stole 3 sheep from a farm near the fjord and how the farmer tricked it with a cloak soaked in fish blood. It's funny, absurd, possibly exaggerated, but it holds the room like a spell. Every person, from the cranky old uncle to the youngest child, is drawn in. Because stories here don't just fill time, they bind people. They remind you of who you are, where you came from, and what the rules of the world are, even if those rules occasionally include, say, outwitting a bear with nothing but lunch scraps and confidence. And then seamlessly the story shifts. That's the trick. A good storyteller doesn't just tell a story, they guide it. One moment you're laughing about a sheep-thieving bear, and the next you're in the middle of a tale about a warrior who left home for the east and never returned, but whose voice was heard one night, years later, whispering from the fire. You feel the air change when that part begins. The Longhouse stills again. Even the goat chewing in its pen seems to pause. This is the other kind of story, the kind that reminds you that the walls are thin, not physically but spiritually. That voices don't always come from mouths. That warmth isn't the only thing that slips between the living and the dead. These are the stories best told at night, when the fire is low, when everyone is still half tethered to dreams, when the house feels small and the outside world feels huge. The time when your ancestors might actually be listening, or responding. There's a scholarly theory that storytelling in longhouses wasn't just tradition, it was ritual, that the act of speaking aloud in the presence of fire and family created a space where memory and myth blurred, that every tale was a form of collective dreaming, guided by a voice everyone trusted. Some go further, arguing that these stories were strategic, used to shape behaviour, reinforce values, subtly correct missteps. After all, what better way to teach your children not to wander into the forest at night than with a tale about a man who did, and came back with no voice and his shadow walking behind him? Quirky fact: there are records of Viking-age children being named after characters in these stories. Not heroes, necessarily, but people who were brave, or clever, or just stubborn enough to matter. Imagine telling your child they're named after a woman who once scared off a troll by pretending to be its long-lost mother, and that child carrying that story every time someone speaks their name. The voice continues now, drifting into a story about Loki. Trickster, shapeshifter, chaos embodied. The tone is wry, half mocking, half admiring. There's laughter here. Not polite, quiet giggles, but genuine, snorting laughter. Loki stories always bring it out. They remind everyone that the gods aren't perfect. That sometimes, getting through the winter means lying to a giant, stealing a horse, and hiding under a pile of fish guts until the danger passes. They're absurd, and they're beloved. You're lying back now, the fur pulled up again, the firelight flickering softly on the ceiling. The storyteller's voice is steady, calm. You realise you've stopped noticing the cold, the smoke, even the slight ache in your hip from sleeping on a wood bench. You're inside the story now, and so is everyone else. Someone throws another log on the fire without a word. The flames rise a little, shadows shift, and the story goes on seamlessly. You glance around. No one is doing anything else. No weaving, no tool mending, just listening, just being here. Because this is what you do before sleep, or after waking, in the Viking Longhouse. You listen, you laugh. You get reminded that the world is bigger than your aches, that the ancestors had it harder, that the gods are messy and petty and powerful, just like you. And then, just as quietly as it began, the story ends. There's no applause, no dramatic sign-off, just a soft grunt, the clearing of a throat, and silence. The room holds on to the last words like breath held too long. Then someone rolls over, someone else mutters a blessing. A child whispers, "Tell another." But there isn't one, not tonight. You pull the blanket up to your chin, your eyes already heavier than before, and as you drift back into sleep, it's with the stories still circling in your head. Stories of gods and monsters, bears and tricks, ancestors and shadows, stories that warm the room in ways the fire never could. Because here in the Longhouse, sleep comes not just on the back of fire and fur, but on the echo of a voice, on memory, on myth, on a story well told. And tonight, you sleep warmer for it. Sometime deep in the night, after the story has ended, after the fire has crackled itself into a steady rhythm again, you find yourself dreaming. But this dream feels different, less like an imagination running wild, and more like a message whispered straight into the folds of your blanket. In it, you're on a battlefield, knee-deep in snow, surrounded by men and women whose faces flicker between the living and the dead. They chant, not words, but something that pulses through the air like thunder muffled under ice. Overhead, a massive wolf watches from a ridge, and beyond that, just barely visible through swirling snow, is a long, low hall made of glowing wood and steel beckoning. You wake, not with a jolt, but with a cold that doesn't come from the room around you. Welcome to the dreamscape of a Viking sleeper. Dreams in the Longhouse aren't just mental entertainment. They're layered, loaded, and in many cases treated like actual messages, windows cracked open just wide enough for spirits or gods, or long-gone ancestors to sneak through. You sit up, breath fogging softly, and glance around. A few others are stirring too. Maybe they've had dreams of their own. Maybe they're just caught in the same uneasy stillness that seems to follow such visions. Either way, the air feels different now, heavier, like the Longhouse itself is listening. In Norse culture, dreams weren't casually dismissed. They were watched, interpreted, sometimes feared. A dream could mean prophecy, a warning, a sign from the gods. And if you dreamed of battle, especially if it ended in your death, that wasn't necessarily bad news. That might be an invitation to Valhalla. You've heard of it before, of course. Odin's Hall, the golden place in Asgard where fallen warriors feast and fight forever, waiting for Ragnarok. But the details get lost in translation. It's not heaven. It's not peace. It's preparation. The chosen few who die with honour are scooped from the battlefield by Valkyries, divine shield maidens, and brought to a place where night never truly falls and mead flows endlessly. In your dream, you weren't drinking mead. You were standing outside the gates, unsure if you belonged there. That's about right. The question of who dreams of Valhalla, and whether it means anything, is debated among historians. Some believe it was a metaphor used by skalds and warriors, a kind of aspirational poetry for the battlefield. Others argue it was quite literal for many, that men and women believed with complete certainty that their dreams could transport them to places not yet reached in death. That dream Valkyries were a real sign, that visions of shining halls, of feasts, of battlefields were invitations to prepare. You swing your legs over the side of the bench and plant your feet on the dirt floor. It's cold, but not biting. The fire, even low, has done its job. You stretch your shoulders, sore but intact. The dream lingers, not in that foggy, forgettable way, but in a way that seems to cling to your skin like smoke. A few others nearby are also awake. One man leans over to his wife and murmurs something you can't hear. She nods slowly, not comforted, just accepting. Maybe he dreamed too. There's even a word for dreams that carry meaning in Old Norse, dröma. But within that there's a special kind, spadröma, prophetic dreams. These are the ones people listen for. Not just random images, but messages, instructions, omens. In the sagas, kings and jarls often awaken from these dreams and call for seers to interpret them. The dream becomes a story, passed down, studied, reenacted, sometimes even feared. Of course, not every dream is divine. Some are just byproducts of life in a smoky house full of noise and stress and goats. But the line between sacred and ordinary is blurry here. One woman claims to have seen her father in a dream, smiling, sitting by a fire that never goes out. She says he told her to save some seeds from last harvest. She did. They grew better than expected. Coincidence? Maybe. But no one here would say that out loud. And then there's the stranger territory. Dreams of creatures, beasts, shadows. The sagas are full of dreams that involve animals speaking, or trees bleeding, or someone's shadow moving in the wrong direction. These weren't dismissed as imagination. They were studied, talked about. There were people whose job it was to decode such things. Not priests, but dream readers. Every village had one. Sometimes an old widow, sometimes a blind man, someone who'd had enough dreams and lived long enough to see which ones came true to be trusted. You lie back down, eyes still open, the roof just visible above you in the faint firelight. You wonder whether the dream meant anything. You weren't killed in it. You didn't see a Valkyrie, but the wolf that watched you. That has weight. Wolves mean many things here. Destruction, guardianship, transformation. Fenrir, the great wolf of myth, is said to bring about Ragnarok itself. But wolves also symbolize resilience, intelligence, and survival against the cold. Maybe the dream wasn't about death. Maybe it was about surviving until it mattered. You close your eyes again, this time not to drift, but to remember, to hold the details while they're still clear. The snow underfoot, the smell of pine smoke, the cold edge of a sword in your hand, though you don't remember drawing it. Maybe someone else will tell their dream tomorrow. Maybe they'll mention the wolf too. And even if you don't bring it up, it'll stay with you. Because in the Viking Longhouse, dreams aren't forgotten with the morning light. They're told, held, sometimes feared, often believed. And whether yours was a message or a shadow or just your brain trying to process the smell of burned mutton, it has marked you. Sleep returns slowly, but it does return. The room is quieter now. The wind outside has softened. No footsteps from predators. No stirring from animals. Just breath. Slow and steady. And as you slip under again, this time you don't dream of battle. You dream of the Longhouse. Whole, warm, alive. And that too feels like a gift. When the Longhouse stirs again, it's with the soft clatter of unfamiliar sounds. Not the domestic rustle of morning prep, or the low murmurs of family, but something sharper. The dull thud of boots, the rattle of leather, the unmistakable scrape of metal against wood. You're not fully awake yet, but your senses are already on high alert. You open one eye just enough to confirm what your ears already suspect. Someone new has entered the Longhouse. Two men, cloaked in wolf pelts and dusted with frost, stand just inside the door, steam rising from their shoulders like spirits shedding their winter skins. Raiders. Or, if you want to soften it, returning warriors from a campaign. Either way, they're a different breed from the farmers and herders who've spent the last several weeks huddled together in this smoky cocoon. These men bring the outside in with them. Cold, salt air, and the scent of distant places. Everyone knows the drill. A space is cleared near the fire. Someone hands them bowls of thick stew without a word. They sit, stretch out their legs, and eat as if they've been dreaming of the hot broth for weeks. No one asks questions right away. No one needs to. The story's in their clothes, in the dried blood on one man's sleeve, in the way both seem a little too still, like the motion hasn't quite left their bones. This is the Viking raiders' return. And while their legends are all longships and gold and glory, the reality is this. They come home tired, hungry, and desperate for the heat of their own hearth. You shift slightly under your blanket, making room on the bench beside you for a child who's just been displaced by the newcomers. Everyone makes adjustments when raiders return, not because they demand it, but because they've earned it. These are the men who took the risk, who sailed through ice and storm, who may have fought, may have killed, and most importantly came back. Sleep on campaign, you quickly learn, is a different beast. Ask any returning Viking, and they'll tell you that sleeping aboard a longship is equal parts endurance test and tactical exercise. You doze in shifts, wrapped in a damp cloak, shield at your side, sword always within arm's reach. There's no room to stretch, no warmth unless you're pressed between two other half-frozen men, and no soft furs or familiar voices. Just the creak of the mast, the groan of waves, and the ever-present knowledge that the next beach could mean battle. There's even a word for the sleep warriors catch between fights, skjálfada, meaning trembling or shivering. Not just from cold, but from the body's inability to fully rest with adrenaline still pulsing through it. It's not real sleep, it's survival nap mode, Viking edition. When these men finally make it home, the Longhouse becomes more than just shelter. It becomes relief. The warmth isn't just physical, it's emotional, historical, almost sacred. It's the sense of rejoining the living after walking among ghosts, and the sleep they get on that first night back. It's not sleep, it's surrender. You watch one of them now, having eaten his fill, curl up directly on the floor beside the hearth. No bench, no blankets, just the dirt, a rolled cloak and the proximity to fire. Within moments he's out, snoring softly, one hand still curled around the hilt of his knife. It's the kind of sleep you only get when your body finally accepts that it's safe, that you're not sailing, not watching, not bleeding, just home. There's something deeply human in this moment, and also something entirely Viking. The warrior sleeps not alone in a hall of honour, but among family, children, livestock. He sleeps with his boots still on, soot smudging his cheek, no one making a fuss. In this culture, glory is earned abroad, but rest is earned here. The children are already creeping closer, curious but cautious. One tugs at the edge of the man's cloak, another pokes at his boots. A woman hisses and waves them off, but it's too late. He opens one eye, smiles faintly, and lets out a long, tired sigh. The kids scatter, giggling, but the man doesn't move. He just closes his eyes again and drifts off deeper. And here's where the scholarly debate bubbles up again. Was the Viking raiders' life as constant as legend suggests? Were they always off pillaging, always returning with stolen silver and tales of conquest? Or was that just a few seasons in a much longer life of farming, fishing, and yes, sleeping in longhouses? Most researchers now agree the raiding years were often brief, one chapter in a life filled with more mundane but vital tasks. And once that chapter ended, the Longhouse welcomed them back like any other family member. No pedestal, no parade, just a spot by the fire and the soft permission to sleep without a blade at your throat. There's a kind of democracy in this. The same Longhouse that holds the village elder, the newborn, the herder, and the blacksmith also holds the returning raider. No special room, no golden bed, just a blanket, a bowl, a bench if they're lucky. And after weeks of cold sea wind and cramped ship sleep, that's more valuable than gold. You lean back again, watching the firelight flicker across the man's face. Even in sleep there's tension in his jaw. Memories maybe, or just the ache of 1,000 miles on foot and sea. But slowly you see it fade. His breath slows, his shoulders loosen. The Longhouse does its work, and tonight, for the first time in what was probably weeks, the warrior sleeps deeply, wrapped not in armour or salt-soaked cloth, but in the breath of a home that remembers him. The stories will come later, the scars, the songs. But for now there is only the fire, the floor, and the kind of sleep you can only find after you've gone far enough to know what you were missing. By the time dawn finally threatens the edge of the sky, the Longhouse is humming. Not loudly, not with music or bells or the roar of a rooster announcing the new day, but with the kind of quiet momentum that comes only after surviving another winter night. Bodies stretch, cloaks shift. Someone yawns loud enough to start a chain reaction of jaw cracking across the benches. You hear the crackle of fresh logs being thrown into the hearth. The old fire, like the rest of you, has made it through the dark. The light still hasn't reached the interior. It'll be another hour before the sun clears the hills enough to kiss the turf roof. But the house knows it's morning, not because of clocks or alarms, but because the rhythm of sleep has run its course, and that rhythm is sacred. One by one, sleepers peel themselves from the warmth of their furs. Some are slow, dragging their limbs like they've been carved from ice. Others are abrupt, snapping upright with the kind of stiff urgency that suggests they've been holding in a bladder full of mead for at least 3 hours. A few mumble greetings, Others ignore each other entirely, still bleary, still half dreaming. You've never seen so many people wake up in near total silence. That's the strange beauty of the Viking longhouse in the early morning. It doesn't burst into life, it unfurls. The first movements belong to the tenders of the hearth, usually women, though not always. They poke at the embers, coax flames from beneath charred logs, and ladle warm water from the soot-blackened pot that's been simmering all night. The pot is never empty. It is the hearth's heart, and it feeds everyone. Maybe this morning there's a thin porridge left from yesterday. Maybe just broth, laced with herbs. Either way, it's warm, and right now that's more valuable than flavour. You're offered a wooden cup without being asked. It's steaming. Smells vaguely of barley and something green. Nettles, maybe. You sip. It's thin, but it floods your chest with heat and lets your fingers curl without cracking. Around you, others are doing the same. It's not a feast, it's fuel. The kind you need before stepping out into frostbitten fields or into the animal pens caked with ice and dung. There's no breakfast table here, no chairs, just benches, ledges and the floor. Food is passed hand to hand. Mothers feed children with one hand while pulling on boots with the other. A man balances a bowl on his knee as he braids his hair back from his face. No one rushes, but no one dawdles either. The house is shaking off sleep like a bear shaking snow from its fur. And as it does, the leftovers of the night remain scattered across the floor like artifacts from a dream. A broken comb, a twisted strap, a child's toy carved from bone, now chewed slightly by something that might have been a dog or an overly curious goat. A fur blanket that slipped half off its bench and now hangs limp, like a discarded pelt after a long hunt. The evidence of life lived not in tidy compartments, but layered, one need atop the next. You start to notice the smells again. Smoke, of course, still thick, still wrapped around everything you own. But also the sharpness of sweat, the faint sourness of wool that's been damped too many times and dried too few. Over it all, the clean freezing breath of morning drifting in through the door someone cracked open, just enough to let the cold bite its way in. The world outside is white. Snow fell overnight, light and even like sifted flour. Footprints lead away from the door in every direction. You watch as the early risers slip into boots stiff with frost and head out to feed livestock or check traps. One man swings an axe across his shoulder like he's greeting an old friend. Another woman, barely into her teens, drags a bucket toward the well. But you don't leave yet. Not everyone does. Inside, a few stay behind, not out of laziness, but because they're the ones who make sure the longhouse itself survives. They sweep, restack the firewood, patch the thatch where it's sagged. A boy climbs into the rafters with the casual bravery of someone too young to think about falling. He's checking for leaks. Probably didn't even get breakfast first. There's a quiet pride in these morning rituals. No one announces what they're doing. There's no checklist, no delegation. People simply know. The longhouse gave you shelter, warmth, sleep. Now you give something back. In small ways. Stitch a torn tunic, sharpen a tool, teach a younger child how to twist cord from sinew. And here's the little-known fact you'd miss if you blinked. This is when the most real conversations happen. Not during dinner, not around the fire, not even during the dramatic retellings of ancient sagas. It's in these soft, cold, bleary-eyed moments, when people's guards are down, when they're still halfway between dream and duty. This is when secrets slip out. Confessions. Jokes that are funnier because no one has the energy to pretend they're not. You hear two women whispering near the fire. They're teasing someone, probably a cousin or brother, for snoring like a dying ox. The accused groans and pulls a fur over his face. Everyone nearby smiles, but no one really laughs, not loudly. That'll come later. Right now they're still waking up, and so are you. The longhouse feels smaller now. Not cramped, just closer, intimate. You know these people better than you did yesterday. Not because of what they said, but because you slept beside them, breathed the same smoky air, shared body heat, space, silence. You help sweep the straw, you fold a blanket, you return a bowl to its hook near the fire pit. It's nothing heroic, but it's enough. In a house like this, survival is made of small tasks, done daily, without complaint. And as the light outside begins to press harder against the open door, you feel it, the shift, the transition from night to day, from shelter to action. The Longhouse will empty soon, not fully, but enough. The rhythm continues. You take one last look around. The fire is strong again, the benches are tidied, the floor is swept, and beneath it all the quiet thrum of life still pulses, warm, constant, ready to begin again. This house let you sleep, let you dream, kept you alive. Now it's time to return the favour. You step outside finally, and the cold hits you like a truth you didn't ask for. It doesn't just bite, it clings, wraps itself around your limbs like it means to settle in for good. And yet, it's beautiful. The world beyond the Longhouse has been transformed overnight into a gleaming white canvas, untouched but for a few wandering footprints. The snow crunches beneath your boots, dry and sharp. Your breath curls out in thick clouds, and every exhale is a small storm. Behind you the Longhouse breathes too. Smoke slips from the roof's vent, slow and spiralling, like the house is sighing after a long dream-heavy sleep. Even from the outside you can feel its warmth still clinging to your clothes, your skin, your hair. It lingers in the fibres. That scent, smoke, sweat, wood, wool is now a part of you. You turn and really look at the structure. It's more than a building. The Longhouse is alive in its own way. A low, sturdy beast crouched against the cold, covered in turf and snow, with bones of timber and breath of fire. You understand now why so many sagas refer to the home as if it has moods, tempers, needs, because it does. You've lived in it, slept in it, and in return, it's kept you. The morning tasks begin without ceremony. Someone tosses you a crude wooden shovel with a crooked handle, and you join in clearing the path. A few older children are breaking ice in the water troughs. The warriors who returned last night have vanished again, likely checking traps or scouting the nearby ridgeline for new game. One of them left his boots drying too close to the hearth, and now they've curled upward like old leather leaves. No one says anything. Everyone's made that mistake at least once. And as your body moves, warming slowly, you begin to reflect on how different this waking life is from what you knew before. There is no schedule, no digital calendar to tell you where to be. There is only need. The animals need water, the fire needs fuel, the children need supervision, the roof needs checking, and the Longhouse, it needs care. Because despite its strength, this place is fragile in ways that would terrify your modern self. A roof leak isn't just an annoyance. It's a threat to every dry blanket and sleeping body beneath it. A broken latch on the outer door is an invitation to wolves. A dying fire is the beginning of frostbite. There is no margin for error here, no backup generator, no corner store, just people, tools, and time. You stop shoveling to watch a group reinforce the side of the Longhouse where the wind hits hardest. They wedge a fresh plank into the wall, hammering it in with a stone mallet. Snow slides off the turf above like a soft avalanche. It lands beside you with a puff and a satisfying thump. And in that moment, the absurd reality of it all hits you again. People have been doing this, exactly this, for over 1,000 years. Fighting the cold, tending the home, earning their sleep. And they weren't just surviving, they were living, laughing, storytelling, dreaming, even raiding when the mood struck, and always, at the centre of it, the Longhouse. Not just a building, a womb, a forge, a fortress. That's something even historians don't always catch. The way the Longhouse wasn't merely a shelter from nature, it was nature, tamed just enough to live inside. The beams overhead came from local trees. The turf on the roof grew from the same earth the families farmed. The walls were daubed with clay, straw, sometimes dung, whatever was available, and the insulation. It came not from modern materials, but from layering life, furs, bodies, breath, smoke, and faith. Scholars still debate how efficient these homes really were. Some argue they were barely above freezing during the worst of winter. Others insist that, with the hearth constantly burning and the walls packed with insulation, the temperature inside could hover near comfortable, especially in sleeping zones. But comfort is a modern term. What mattered here was survivability, and clearly it worked. Generations were born and died under these roofs. Names were remembered, stories passed, entire lives lived, start to finish, in a house no taller than a single story. You finish your task and head back inside, brushing snow from your shoulders. The warmth slaps you gently as you re-enter. Not hot, not stifling, just present. like someone left a blanket on the whole room. Inside, the longhouse is humming again. A child is singing to herself while weaving cord. Two elders are whispering and pointing at something carved into a rafter. One of the warriors is snoring again, curled on his side, blissfully unaware of the world outside. The fire's been built up, and the glow casts everything in that rich amber you've grown to love. You sit near it again, stretching your hands toward the flame. Your fingers, red and raw from the cold, begin to thaw. And in this quiet moment you realize something strange. You're not just visiting anymore. You've adjusted. You've internalized the rhythms. You don't flinch at the smoke. You don't crave privacy. You've stopped expecting silence. You've stopped expecting space. You've even learned to sleep with someone's foot wedged under your blanket and another person breathing directly into your ear. And somehow it works. Because this isn't just a house. It's an organism, a living, breathing thing, one that demands participation, that expects compromise. And in return, it gives you something modern life often forgets to offer: belonging. You look around at the others, at the way they fold into the structure, not resisting it, not trying to make it something it isn't. They know its flaws, its leaks, its drafts, and they stay anyway. Because the longhouse isn't about perfection, it's about together. The floor creaks as someone walks past. You hear the fire crack again. The children are now playing a game that involves hiding bits of charred wood in each other's shoes. You don't stop them. You just sit and soak it in. And for the first time, maybe ever, you feel it. You are home. By mid-morning, the longhouse is a full ecosystem in motion. Not just people coming and going, but energy cycling, roles rotating, voices overlapping in that low, rhythmic murmur that comes only when every person is doing something useful or pretending to. The floor is swept again. Furs are aired out over benches to shake free of smoke and whatever strange smells they've absorbed, and the fire has mellowed into its daytime mode, steady, fed with precision, not waste. You've been assigned a task, naturally. No one stays idle here. Today it's something seemingly simple, helping to restuff the sleeping benches with fresh straw. It sounds easy enough until you're ankle deep in scratchy plant matter, hands raw from binding bundles, and lungs full of dust that smells faintly of last season's goats. But the work is strangely satisfying. You're restoring the beds, your bed, and the beds of everyone else who shivered, sighed, and snored their way through the night beside you. These benches aren't just furniture, they're beds, seats, storage chests, and occasionally hiding places. Each one is carved and patched in 100 different ways. Some are lined with old animal skins, others with lumpy burlap sacks full of reeds. You start to notice personal touches: a painted stone wedged into one corner, a scrap of embroidered fabric tied to a support beam, a chicken feather tucked between slats, placed there by a child for reasons long forgotten. And this is where you start to understand the real secret to how people here sleep without freezing to death. It's not just the fire, not just the furs, not even the body heat. It's the rituals, the care taken before sleep, the attention given to every detail. The bench is cleaned, restuffed, repaired. The furs are shaken and dried. The charms are checked. The fire is banked just so. Every evening is preparation, not just for rest, but for survival. You pause while wedging straw beneath the slats and glance toward the central hearth. It's now circled by 3 older women weaving something together, cords of flax or perhaps sinew, braided into lengths that could become anything from a new belt to reinforcement for the outer door. They're not talking much, but their movements are in sync. They've likely done this exact pattern 1,000 times, muscle memory guiding hands more than thought. One of them finally speaks casually, like she's commenting on the weather. She says she once fell asleep too close to the door during a snowstorm and woke up with a layer of ice in her hair. Another woman nods and adds, "At least your toes stayed on." The third just chuckles, revealing a mouth with more gaps than teeth. No drama, no trauma. Just memories of when things went wrong, and weren't fatal. That's part of the Viking mindset you've come to respect, even if it's a little bleak. Everything has a cost. You'll lose a toe before you lose your life. You'll sacrifice comfort to protect others. You'll go without to make sure the longhouse stays whole. Comfort isn't a right. It's a byproduct of cooperation. You keep working, knees now sore, hands covered in fine cuts from the straw. Eventually, the sleeping benches are back in order, fluffed, padded, rearranged. You're rewarded not with thanks but with a nod and a bowl of hot grain. That's the Viking version of applause. Nearby, a small child sits cross-legged on one of the now-repaired benches, carefully arranging a line of pebbles into a spiral. Another child watches silently, then ruins the whole thing with a single poke. A scream follows, then a chase, and soon they're both laughing as they dart between benches. No one stops them. This too is part of the rhythm. Chaos folded gently into the order. You sit back and observe how the Longhouse prepares for night even in the middle of the day. Because that's the rhythm. Wake, work, maintain, prepare again. It never ends. There's no season where the Longhouse gets to rest. It's a living organism, and every one of you is part of its function. You help inspect the fur blankets next, shaking loose whatever the straw didn't already catch. Some are simple hides, cracked and stitched from years of use. Others are lush, thick pelts from creatures with names you're glad you didn't meet in the forest. The best ones are saved for the elder and the children. No one questions that. Rank here is determined not by ego, but by vulnerability. You run your hands over one fur, noticing a patch worn thin in the middle. Someone's been sleeping in the same position every night for years. The shape of a life pressed into hide. You fold it and place it carefully near the hearth, where it will warm through before night returns. And then someone mentions the sun. It's not exactly visible, not directly, but the sky outside has changed colour, pale blue threading into the grey. Someone steps out and calls back, "It's there." The room doesn't erupt into cheers, but there's a noticeable lift in mood. Because here in the north, sunlight is a gift, not a guarantee. Entire weeks go by without it breaking through. So even a faint, washed-out disk behind a veil of cloud counts as a small miracle. You follow a few others outside, shielding your eyes against the bright snow, and there it is, the sun. Weak, bleary-eyed, but real. It doesn't warm the skin much, but it does warm the mind. A kind of collective exhale ripples through everyone. Someone jokes that maybe the gods remembered where they left it. A child asks if they can chase it. Another says they're going to spit into it and see what happens. They do. Nothing happens. Inside, the Longhouse soaks in the little bit of sun that filters through the door. Dust motes catch the light, floating in lazy spirals like tiny golden ghosts. The smoke thins slightly. The air brightens just enough to feel new again. And as you stand there, between the interior dark and the snow-blind exterior, you understand the genius of this place. It's not just that it keeps people warm, it keeps them together. The Longhouse is designed not just for shelter, but for unity. It forces proximity, enforces cooperation, encourages shared stories, shared sleep, shared survival. You return inside where the floor has been cleared for evening prep. The cycle begins again. Water is heated, the fire is stirred, blankets are folded, food is gathered, the beds you helped fix will be filled again tonight. And you? You'll lie down beneath the same roof with the same smoke curling overhead, the same fire painting shadows across your closed eyes. And when the cold comes knocking again, like it always does, the Longhouse will answer the door with a wall of warmth made entirely from what you built during the day. By evening everything slows. It's not sudden, not a curtain drop moment, but a gentle easing off, the way a stream widens into a quiet bend before night falls over the water. The chores are mostly done, the tools put away, the animals fed and locked in. Outside, snow falls again, light and lazy, and the world beyond the door has blurred into white and grey. But inside the Longhouse, it's colour and texture and sound. The amber flicker of the hearth fire, the soft murmur of voices, the scrape of bowls being filled. Dinner is simple as always, some dried fish rehydrated in broth, a bit of barley mash, and a chunk of something that might be turnip or might be yesterday's bread pretending to be turnip. It's not fancy, no feast, but it's hot. That's the main thing. No one complains, not really. You sit close to the fire again, sharing a bench with a woman who hums tunelessly between bites, and a boy who eats like he's trying to outrun his own hunger. There's something different in the room tonight. A stillness, not heavy, not ominous, just settled. Everyone's a little slower, a little quieter, not tired in the exhausted, bone-deep way, more like content. Even the children have calmed. One sits cross-legged near the hearth, staring into the flames like she's watching the gods dance. Another lies across her mother's lap, eyes fluttering closed as the warmth of soup and fire does its work. And this is the final miracle of the Longhouse. It doesn't just hold bodies, it holds the day. Every sound, every breath, every scrape of wood on stone folds into the walls. The whole structure becomes saturated with experience. If you press your palm to the timber, you could swear it's warm, not from the fire, but from the living. All of it. Somewhere near the back, someone begins a song, not loud, not performative. Just a simple melody rising from a woman's throat like it's always been there, waiting for nightfall to open the door. It's not in a language you fully understand, but you get the gist. It's about stars, distance, maybe longing, maybe just weather. Doesn't matter. The tune wraps itself around the rafters and settles into your ears like wool. You don't hum along, but you could. The Longhouse grows dimmer, the fire banked low again, letting its heat and light stretch for the hours ahead. Shadows lengthen, then disappear into the familiar dark. One by one, people rise, brush off hands, and find their way to their sleeping places. The same benches you helped restuff this morning are now reclaimed. Someone adjusts a fur, someone else mutters about a draft near their toes. A child is carried across the room, already asleep, arms dangling like a sack of potatoes. The song ends without fanfare, just fades, and then the house is quiet again. You lie back, feeling the ache of muscles well used and the satisfaction of a day completed in full. Your body knows what to do now. It curls into the fur like it's always done this, like it belongs here. And it does. The person beside you, one of the returned warriors, is already half asleep, mouth open, hands folded on his chest. He's not on edge anymore. He trusts the walls, the warmth, the watch. You do too. Outside, the wind starts to pick up again. You can hear it scraping along the turf roof, moaning like it's been left out too long. Snow ticks softly against the door, but you don't flinch. You know what stands between you and the storm. Inside, the temperature drops just slightly. The fire's still working, but the chill always seeps in eventually. And that's when the real insulation takes over. The people. One by one, you feel the warmth gather around you, not just from your own body, but from everyone else's. A shared warmth, communal, earned. And then comes the breath. It's the only sound left now. Dozens of people, all sleeping or nearly so, all breathing in the same soft rhythm. It's not synchronized, but it's not far off. It's like being part of something organic, something larger than yourself. The Longhouse breathes through you, the old woman by the fire, the baby swaddled in too many layers, the warrior with one boot off, the child who keeps kicking you in her sleep. All of them part of the pulse of this place. It's not perfect. Someone's snoring, loudly. Another person mutters every few minutes, caught in half dreams. One of the dogs is licking itself with audible enthusiasm. But none of that feels out of place. It's the noise of a house that lives, that sleeps. A few final details settle. Someone stokes the fire one last time. A girl tiptoes barefoot across the room to tuck a forgotten toy back under her blanket. A man at the door listens briefly to the wind, then bars it again without a word. And slowly, finally, truly, the Longhouse sleeps. The scholar in you, if you still had that part switched on, might marvel at the architectural brilliance of it all, the efficiency, the social function, the insulation value of combined breath and body heat. But the person you've become after these nights doesn't think like that anymore. You just feel grateful. Grateful for the furs, for the fire, for the roof, for the warmth built not from luxury but from people doing their part. Tomorrow it will start again, wake, work, patch, feed, sleep. But not yet. Now, the house holds you. The darkness folds over you like a blanket, and you fall, gently, steadily, into the kind of sleep that only comes when your bones trust the walls around them. No fanfare, no grand ending, just warmth, just breath, just rest. And now, as the last firelight fades from our journey, and the Longhouse drifts fully into silence, you finally get it. This wasn't just a tour of Viking sleeping habits, or a list of clever survival tricks. This was a slow immersion into an ancient rhythm, one where warmth isn't given, it's earned, one where sleep isn't a luxury, it's a strategy, and one where the people you sleep beside matter just as much as the fire you sleep next to. You came here asking how they didn't freeze to death, but the real question was always, how did they live together well enough to survive at all? The answer was in every bench you repaired, every bowl passed across the hearth, every breath shared under a roof that relied on everyone inside to keep standing. This wasn't central heating and high thread count linen. This was cooperation, obligation, and the quiet wisdom of people who understood that sometimes the warmest thing you have isn't fur, it's each other. You learned that smoke in the lungs beats frost in the bones, that a bench warmed by someone else's nap is still better than sleeping cold and proud, that even warriors snore, that old women can outlast blizzards, that furs lose heat if you don't curl up close, that dreams mean something, and maybe, just maybe, that's where the gods still speak. You also saw that even in the dead of winter life persisted. Children played, songs were sung, jokes were muttered under smoky breaths. The Longhouse didn't just protect people, it held their humanity together. Sleep wasn't escape from that life, it was a way to return to it each day, whole, or at least intact. So, if tonight your own room feels colder than it should, or if the silence feels too sharp, remember the Longhouse. Remember the crowded warmth, the echoing breath, the ever-burning hearth, and maybe tuck your blanket in a little tighter. Sweet dreams.